Running.
Good.
I call this meeting to order. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Waki, the Ottawa and Mississaugas people. Confirmation of the agenda that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby accepts the agenda for March 24th, 2022 special council meeting as presented. Do I have a mover? I have Rick McBurney moving, Anita Van Hindersum seconding. All in favor? Carries. Thank you. Disclosure of community interest. There'd be none, and
Do we have to declare pecuniary interest if the effects of the official plan will affect our properties? Or is that, and the value of our probable
I'm going to
value of our
ask,
properties?
can you answer that one?
I think it might be reasonable to just state that your personal property is included in the amendment, and that, you know, you'd like to retain your ability to offer comments directly on your own personal property, and at that time you'd likely step away from the council table to do that as sort of a member of the public and not as part of the decision-making group, so.
Chris?
By default, any councillor who's a farmer in the township would be affected, so I don't see, the plan is limiting any councillor, potential councillor, so I don't see that it should affect them, personally.
Okay. Good, guys? Go ahead, Trevor.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate to council that it's councilors' individual right to either declare or not to declare. Staff can't tell you whether to declare or not to declare. So if you think you do, declare. If you don't think you do, don't declare. It's your personal prerogative on whether you declare or not. So I just want to make that comment.
Thank you kindly, Deputy Reeve, and in that case, if anybody would like to declare, please speak now, or forever, or a little bit, hold your peace. Okay, thank you. Okay, delegations reporting 5.1 would be the 2022 North Huron official plan review, and I'm going to hand it over to you girls, I believe. Thank you.
So first of all, thank you very much for having us here today. I think it's a great opportunity for us to have a bit more of a conversation with council, certainly wanting this to feel a little bit more like a workshop style where we can have discussion about the official plan review. We do have the draft document that was provided, and again, these are the initial sort of staff recommendations about policy changes, mapping changes, and we're certainly looking forward to consulting closely with the community to identify if there are additional amendments or if we need to massage some of the amendments that have been proposed by staff, whether it's about housing policies, the mapping, or other items that maybe haven't been raised yet. So this is sort of, as I say, the beginning of the process, and just really look forward to having some back and forth today.
Reeve,
Yes, go ahead.
can we make comments as you proceed, please? Or do you want to wait till the end?
Through the Reeve, I would be very happy to take questions through if that is council's wish.
Okay, thank you. I think that would probably work best.
Yeah, okay, great.
So I guess we'll, okay, great, thanks. Just start with our presentation. So we just wanted to provide a bit of a recap on where we are currently in the process. So council may recall on the February 24th, staff were directed to evaluate any comments received from the public with requests for suggested policies or mapping changes received throughout the consultation process. So, and as Denise mentioned previously, we certainly intend to continue to consult with members of the public after this workshop meeting. And then also, council did direct staff to draft policy and mapping amendments to meet the requirements under Section 26 of the Planning Act, in addition to any other potential revisions based on that feedback that we did receive at the February 24th meeting. As Denise mentioned, council did receive a first draft of the text policy amendments, as well as a portion of the mapping amendments. Most of the mapping amendments will comprise of the East Wawanach Ward, just in terms of going through the natural environment mapping, which we will go through in detail today.
I think we're going to start with the mapping piece today and then move on to the policies. So when we looked at the designations or the mapping in the agricultural area of East Wawanach, what we noted was that the mapping is quite dated. And when we compared some of the aerials, the historic aerials, which we now have digitized, to the mapping, there were portions of East Wawanach which appeared that the mapping was based on the 1978 aerials. And what that means is that, the better part of, 45, almost 50 years have gone by, and we haven't updated the mapping to reflect the features that are on the ground. And so that was sort of the basis. So what you have is you have agricultural lands that are designated natural environment, and you have forests that are designated agriculture. And so what we started with is the purpose of the exercise is to accurately map the features on the landscape. And one of the questions I think that comes to any councillor's mind or any member of the public is, well, how is it so outdated, right? Why haven't we been able to update this over time? And I think it really, in a lot of ways, comes down to technology. This is the first official plan reviews that we've done with GIS, with digitally based mapping, where the planners are actually involved in doing that site-by-site analysis of mapping. Typically, this is done by our GIS technicians. They are excellent and very much understand the policy context as well, but a planner brings a different eye to the process. And so that's where I think that our approach is now much more robust and allows us to meet that accuracy that in past years, for example, when we would have used paper maps to do this work, we simply weren't able to achieve that level of accuracy. So I'll show you a little bit about the natural environment piece. So we start with what was called the Natural Heritage Plan, and it was later renamed to the Natural Environment Update for Huron County. And the change in name, came about for several reasons. But the fact is that it was a document that was really based on the technical science behind which areas are in fact natural areas by their science. So this was done by a team of biologists at the two conservation authorities, so Maitland Valley and Asable Bayfield. And it's a technical model that produced sort of the scientific approach to identifying features on the landscape. And it's a scientific exercise. That's useful information. However, it's not necessarily appropriate to incorporate into the planning documents in a completely pure form. And the reason that is because when we look at the landscape, there's many competing uses on the landscape. We have to think about agriculture, aggregate extraction, the opportunity for housing, and the natural environment protection as well comes into that. And so we wanted to make sure that we were looking at that technical mapping, but applying a land use planning lens. And so the map you see before you is sort of what the technical document would have said. These areas are supported scientifically by the technical document, and these other areas are not. And so that's a scientific perspective. We want to make sure that it makes sense from a planning on the ground perspective. The other thing we want to do is to speak to the public, because nobody knows their own farm or their own property better than the landowner. And so that's why it's critically important to ourselves as planners that we make sure that if there is any proposed change on a landowner's property, that they are notified of that with not only a letter, but with a map that shows the change. If we are wrong, if there's been an error, we're looking at it from the air down. It's possible that you can misinterpret aerial photography. And so in those cases, we want to speak to that landowner, understand if we've made an error. In some cases, we do go out to site, kind of put boots on the ground with the biologist to make sure that we, have come to an understanding of what it is or what it isn't. But we're not able to do that, obviously, on every property. So that's determined on an as-needed basis. So we'll walk through a little bit. That mouse doesn't want to cooperate. There we go.
Question?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Denise, through you, Rafe, Denise, can you describe, you've got environmental designations, some are supported, some aren't supported, and, okay, we've got the three. Could you describe each of them and how each one of them would affect the landowner?
Right. So the areas in green are the areas that are already designated natural environment within the North Huron official plan, which were supported by the technical document. So that was the portion of the mapping that was accurate. And you'll see there is a lot of green. The areas that were not supported, it's interesting because in the past, our approach to natural environment mapping was if it was either natural heritage or natural hazard. So I'm going to use the examples of if it was a forest, we would designate it natural environment. If it was a floodplain, we would designate it natural environment. This study didn't look at hazard lands like floodplains. It only looked at heritage, which is meadows, forests, wetlands. And so for that reason, what it came up with was a lot of areas where it said, there's no natural heritage features here. And so as a planner, when I look at that, I think, you're right, there's not heritage, but there likely are hazards. And we also have a responsibility for planning for hazards. So how can we make this map more transparent? What that means for a landowner, let's say your property was identified in the yellow hatch. There's some large sections there. What that likely means is that that portion of their property is in a floodway. So it's not natural hazard and really shouldn't be designated natural environment. What it should be designated is agriculture, but with a flood overlay. So the farmer knows this is a portion of my property. It's good for cropping practices, pasturing, but it's not a place for development in terms of like building a structure like a barn because it's subject to seasonal flooding. Yes.
Through you, Reeve Bailey.
Yep.
A whole part of that yellow area, Nature Center Road right to the right, is the new development from the Scott Drain that we just gave permission for. A lot of that land is all systematically tiled. Do you take that in consideration with your floodplain mapping and hazard mapping? Because a lot of land is drained, so the hazard isn't there anymore, or is mitigated very fast so that the water flows through the creek and farther away to the river.
Right. So when I was talking about floodplain, that's one of the reasons it might not have been supported. Another reason it might not be supported is that there's nothing there, natural heritage or natural hazards. It's simply wrong. So Hannah, I wonder if you might pull up that intersection there we're on Nature Center Road,
Sure.
just north of Westfield. I'm not sure what the north-south road is in this one. So we have a bunch of examples we can walk through to demonstrate these types of things, but that's an example of where we're trying to improve accuracy. Now, when I talk about the light blue, just while Hannah's finding that intersection for us, it's going to be a little hard because we don't have a north-south coordinate, but maybe the counselors might actually be able to recognize it. You said it was on one you just recently did a development?
You're right there
Or
if
there
you
might have been a
lowered
drain
it.
improvement.
Oh, a drain improvement, gotcha. If you just went through that one, and then
It was Nature Center.
Yeah, it's
and-
Nature Center, so just north of West. I think it's along the river. See, I think it's this one here on Scott Line. Yeah. Can you zoom in to that one?
I think this is the example of the meadow, or
Oh. The River Valley.
valley lands,
Yes.
yeah.
So, I'm trying to think of the name. Okay, so on this land, yes, you're absolutely right. I'm going to show you what the designation is currently, and I'm going to show you why it's not accurate. So that's the zoning of the property, which, as you can see, is not accurate, right? Because if we look underneath that green zoning is a farm field. The reason that happened is because it's based off the official plan mapping, which is the same. So then when we go down, so the analysis that Hannah and I would then go through is looking at, again, and we're looking at this site by site. So it does, take some time. I'm just going to throw in a few of the hazards.
Usually just takes a while to load those ones always.
To say, we actually included this as one of our examples. So you had a keen eye, Councillor Van Intersum. What the MVCA, so this is the MVCA layer. So you can see what we've done. We took the data from Maitland Valley Conservation Authority and we built the official plan upon it, and then we built the zoning bylaw amendment upon it. So when there's one error in data, it can get carried through the plans. And from my perspective, that's what's happened here. Because when I talked to the Conservation Authority about the specific data layer, it's called Valley Land. And the reason it exists is it's to demonstrate the change in topography. So I'm going to take off the aerial for a minute and let you just look at, so do you see the change in elevation? That's what these lines represent. So what that tells me is that there's a change in elevation as it moves down towards the riparian area. And so that's why it's considered to be a valley land, and that's why it's considered to have some level of regulation from the Conservation Authority's perspective. But in all likelihood, there isn't the need to have a limitation on building in this entire area. So that's absolutely an example of where we would want to remove that natural environment designation. We want to remove that natural environment zoning so that if that farmer comes in to get a building permit, it's designated and zoned to agriculture, and the only thing they might need to get in that case is a Conservation Authority, it may not even be a permit, it might be a conversation with the Conservation Authority as to where within that regulated area a barn could be successful, but they wouldn't require planning approvals. So that's, again, why it's so important that the planning documents remain up to date, because it can create those issues when someone walks into the building department thinking they're going to be able to get their permit and in fact find out that our mapping is not accurate. So if we can go back to the presentation, I'm going to talk about the what the blue areas mean a little bit more. Okay, so the areas in blue are areas that were supported by the Natural Heritage Plan technical document but are not designated. And so in those cases, there could be a range of reasons. One, it could be a small woodlot that simply wasn't picked up in the past. Another reason is it could be let's say it's a pasture area. Technically, it is a meadow, but it's a pasture, and that's what we wouldn't designate it natural environment. It would stay agriculture. Another reason might be because, let's say it was a gravel pit. So many gravel pits from the air, the areas that aren't being extracted would look like natural areas. And maybe it's a meadow, it might look like a thicket or something of that nature. But in fact, we know those areas are designated for extraction, so we would not be adding them. So that's what I mean about taking a technical exercise and then applying a land use planning lens. And we have done that on every property where a change was identified. And so it's been a very, very careful analysis that, again, we can show you the app viewer, which might be, again, just a way of trying to build some confidence, I think, with council that this process has been done very thoughtfully, very thoroughly, and with very clear intentions about what we are trying to achieve, which is just accuracy.
Question?
Go ahead.
For you, Reeve. Denise, those areas that are deemed not supported, and then the blue ones as well, do they still suffer the 50-meter buffer that the farmer can't do anything on other than crop? Like the,
So the adjacent areas.
like the green, the natural heritage ones have that 50-meter buffer stuck on them. I'm just wondering if the other ones that are not supported have that as well? Or do you have to argue the point? Like,
No, so we would remove the ones that aren't natural areas. We would add the ones that are natural areas so that we have accurate mapping. And then from those accurately mapped natural areas, there's what we call adjacent lands. And so that's the 50 meters that you're referring to. And in those areas, it doesn't mean that a building can't be built. It just means that we would take a close look to make sure that any development in that area would have no negative impact on the feature. That only applies to building, construction. And there's no limitations on cropping. You know, we encourage people to maintain their edge of the woodlot. Oftentimes it's invasive species that are coming out, and farmers, you know, should maintain those. If there's a limb hanging out and the combine's hitting it, well, you know, you lop that limb off. That's all completely supported.
when the new mapping occurs, will that negate the not supported and the blue parts? Will it all become green? Or will it look similar to that, the new mapping, but it'll change to certain degrees?
It will change in that we'll have corrections. And we're gonna walk through a whole series of examples today to show you what the changes might look like on a site-by-site basis.
And we'll still have the three categories or not? Does it become one category, or will the three still be present?
No, so the 3 is just part of the technical document, and that we sort of leave behind. We take the information from the technical document, and then we apply the land use lens. The technical information stays in the technical document, and we move forward with just a natural environment designation that's accurate.
On everything?
So
So-
if I can just see if I can clarify this. So we've heard over and over and over again that the farmers are afraid that if there's a forest here and they're planting corn here, they gotta stay 150 meters away from the natural
50
environment.
50 meters.
50 meters? So they have to, so they got a fence line that's been there forever and a day, but they gotta stay way in this 50 meters. So what he's asking is, when he's farming his land, is somebody gonna come along and say, there's a forest there, that's natural, you gotta be 50 meters over, take that row of corn out? Am I out right on
They won't do
that?
that, no. No, I understand that won't happen.
Okay.
You want to crop, everyone wants you to crop, or what's it become, weeds. No, the point is, we're seeing 3 categories, and under the new mapping system, is it all going to become one?
So-
Yes, it is.
That is dangerous to me.
So Reeve, my clarity is that right now is the green is actually designated natural environment. The orange is designated natural environment today, but it's not supported to be that by the technical drawing. So it could be turning to agriculture or some other thing other than natural environment.
I know.
And the blue is basically, it could be, it's not currently designated natural environment, but it might be suggested to become natural environment. So at the end of the day, this is advising council and the people who are in those areas that there could be potential changes based on the technical document that was produced under the Natural Heritage Plan. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen. There's still public consultation, there's a whole bunch of other things that we're still going through. Is that correct, Denise?
Yes, that's correct. And this is the data that we started with. Hannah and I have now done the analysis as your planners. So we have moved, as I say, we've moved past the technical document because we've done that site-by-site analysis to see, you know, well, a change was proposed. Is it valid from a land use planning stage or perspective or not? So what you received in your package in terms of those concession maps have been improved I would say, based on this is technical, they've been improved from a land use planning perspective already, because we've gone through and we've identified the pastures, taken them out. We've identified the floodplains. We've identified the aggregate. We've identified the recreational areas or whatever else might have been involved. Because this only looks at natural heritage. It's one very, kind of narrow lens, where your official plan is that broader, it's all of the land uses. Okay, let's move on. I think it might become clearer as we walk through examples. So this is just to give you a sense of the analysis. This is the viewer that Hannah and I have used throughout this analysis. And so we'll talk about a few examples here. Okay. So this one, I wonder if Hannah might speak to this one on Nature Center Road.
Sure. So this is just kind of, this is just an example of what we are looking at when we look at the analysis interface. And in terms of, this is an area, for example, that would be proposed to be removed from the natural environment and go to agriculture. So you can see that on the side here. It's proposed to go from natural environment to agriculture. And then what we would do as the planners working through this with GIS and reviewing each property is we would look at this proposed change by the technical document, and then we would determine if that change is appropriate. In this case, we can see underneath this feature, area, that there are no natural features. So this was an example where this is a change we were able to support as the planners.
And sort of the lens by which we made those decisions, we had these sort of rules or implementation rules, if you will. So where agricultural use exists, it stays agriculture. Where flood hazards have been incorporated into natural environment or agriculture, we use flood overlays. So again, if you have, let's use the example of a wetland. A wetland is both heritage and hazard. In that case, that would stay designated natural environment. But where it's a farm field that simply has a floodplain, we want to create more transparency in the document. So we're going to designate that agriculture now, not natural environment, and we're just going to put a flood overlay. Recreation stays as is, aggregate designations are to remain as they are. And so then where natural features exist and are not currently designated, we will look to designate those areas. And then there's policies, right? Where somebody wants to do development either in or adjacent to one of those areas, there's the process lined out as to how that happens or can be looked at. So again, we want to look at some of the trends. And so we looked at, again, looking back through time. That's another thing that this viewer, and we'll show you in a second, it allows us to look back to aerial photography dating back to 1955. And then we have intervals. So we have the 55s, the 1966, the 1978, the 1984. In some areas, the 1989s are clear. In other areas, they're pretty blurry. 99s, and then 2006, 2010, 2015, and 2020. So what this allows the planners to do is literally look back through time and understand how a property has changed to ensure and to inform, are we making an accurate understanding of what's transpired on this property over time. There are many minor changes, and sometimes that really just gets down to the way in which the plane flew, to be honest, and it can create a shadow effect. So we're not wanting to make a lot of changes because it doesn't make a material difference on the map. Again, there's a level of interpretation with any sort of zoning map, but our goal here is to be as accurate as possible without worrying about little shadows. That valley land layer is the one Councillor Van Hittersum noted was a problematic layer from Maitland Valley. We have talked to Maitland Valley and we've changed the way we implement it. We've already done that for the ACW official plan, and now we're also proposing to do it here.
Reeve, just when you talk about mapping, are the areas in which they're like the border or the boundary, whatever the boundary is, are those GPS located? So for example, so it's a review, it's a look, it's not, you can't come to me or I can't go to you and say that's 34 degrees west, like it's just it's a area in which you believe it to be close.
Yeah, it's a representation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're going to show some examples here. So we're going to walk through some of these, and I'll maybe start and then we'll hand it over and Hannah can do some as well. So what you see right now, here's your existing designation. Comes all the way out here. And so what the technical document said, this is one that would have been crossed over in yellow, this area around. Oh, and they can't see my, is there a way that I can show my cursor on the screen? Laser pointer, there we are.
There we go.
So this area here is what would have had a yellow hatch across it, saying not supported by the technical document. Hannah and I take a look at that, we say, well, yeah, we agree, there's nothing there. Let's look back through time. Nope, nothing in 2006, nothing in 1966. This whole area is changed from natural environment, and we now are designating it agriculture. Right? Staff concur. Now we look at this one. So this is a residence. Current official plan designation. So the area in red should be removed from the natural environment area due to the fact that this clearly has, buildings. It's an agricultural type use. But we are looking to clean up this area here. So this is where it's come out in orange. This is a natural area, as is this little piece. So if we look over on this side, we say, yep, this is trees, staff concur. This is trees, staff concur.
Question?
Go ahead.
Through you, Reeve. Denise, it's a standard practice for farmers to delimb, the wrong one's on, to delimb on the edges of their fields. That's not going to be a problem to anybody?
No.
Because they have to come down because they hit equipment.
That's right.
All right.
I'll let you take the next couple, Hannah.
Thanks, Denise. So something else that we also have available to us in terms of the technical documents is information on the different types of ecological communities. So as we can see in this example here, this area here is identified as a riparian meadow versus, if you were to look at these other features, they are identified as a deciduous swamp or coniferous swamp. So those are more like, your woodlots that are a little bit more wet. So something that we would also look at is certain types of communities, just the way the technical document was done, just require a little bit more of a closer look. Woodlots are generally a little bit more simpler, but things like meadows, for example, as Denise mentioned, that's important to take a closer look at because sometimes, as Denise mentioned, there's examples where that might be used for grazing for cattle. So this is an example of, here's the technical document that was provided. It identified this area as a riparian meadow. But when we look at, so this is the existing official plan designation, and this is the 2020 aerials. When we take a look here, it doesn't appear that there is a lot of natural features in this area. It might be a little bit more of a wet area or an area that's not cropped as much as the other areas. So this is one that, for example, we would take a closer look at. And this is what the technical document was proposing, for example. So this area in orange was proposed to be included in the natural environment. And this is an example of, just based on the current as well as the historical land uses, this is an example of a proposed change that staff would deny because it's clear that this is, a portion of it's still being cropped and there's not a lot of natural features on this area.
Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean when I say Hannah and I, as your professional planners, have made recommendations through our analysis to either concur with the technical document or to deny some of the recommendations of the technical document based on land use planning. What we are bringing forward to council and to the public is that more refined version of the mapping for the purpose of conversation, public discussion, and then ultimately direction from yourselves as the decision makers.
So another thing we are also looking is at the areas around any open water courses or drains. That's another area that we took some special attention to. So in this image here, this is an example of, so underneath this area here, there is an open water course drain on the property. And this shows the existing official plan designation. So you can see that there is a bit of a buffer area around that existing drain in the current official plan designation. Just moving to our next slide, the technical document in this instance is recommending, as highlighted in the red, is recommending removal of this area from the natural environment. Because again, along the drain, it's not as naturalized, and there's not a lot of natural features in that case. So that would be an example of something where we would remove the natural environment due to the current use.
So this is an addition, which staff would concur with. So what we see at the orange area outlined the bottom corner of your screen shows that the technical document said, yes, this is an area of natural heritage. It's a sizable patch, 6.3 acres. And so Hannah and I went back looking through time, okay, in 2020, in 2006, in 1966. This has been a forest for a long period of time, I think, and it's fair to say. And we agree, this should be designated natural environment.
All right, so on the, this is on the same property. So this is an example of an area that's already designated. So as you can see, this portion of the property was already designated. And historically, from 1966 up to 2020, that has remained as a woodlot. In terms of the proposed changes in the technical document, if you look at this area here, there are slight changes in terms of to the one side, there's a proposed removal, and then to the other side, there's a proposed addition. This was something we commonly found in the technical document, and there might be a variety of different reasons. So as Denise mentioned earlier, it might be a matter of, the angle that the plane flew that day when they did the historical aerials. So this is something we would look at and see if it would have any consequential impacts in terms of how we would actually implement the planning from a policy perspective. So we did make note that there were opportunities to clean up the data here. So again, this is just showing it a little bit more clearer.
And this is what I sort of meant about the shadow effect and sort of what Deputy Mayor Seep was identifying as well, is that it's meant to be a representation. We want it to be as accurate as possible, but some of these changes really aren't material changes, right? When we're taking a long acre off one side and adding a long acre to the other side, at the end of the day, it doesn't really change much in terms of what the mapping looks like. And from a farmer's standpoint, if they were to come in to get a building permit, we can interpret things based on where are the features actually on the landscape. So again, these are the types of changes we looked at and we said, there's no real material change. The one to the south, though, there absolutely is a material change, and so important that we would make that mapping change and noted in a map, send it to the landowner, and make sure that they were aware that that change was proposed on their property. So this is another one of those sort of shadow effects. Again, removing from one side, adding to the other side. You can see here, though, this one's a little bit more significant. So I would say in that case, I would recommend cleaning this one up. So there will be some changes like that. And again, there's some more shadow. So I think one of the things that when we looked at this as staff, some of these changes are so small. When we put it on property maps, it will essentially look like one skinny little line. And it can be a bit confusing to the property owner because they get a change and they're looking at it and they say, well, where's the change? It ends up being this little line. And so these are the kinds of questions that we had for council today, was from a staff perspective, where the change is so minor and it's really just shadow, we would either advise that we leave the mapping as is and drive on, or we make those as kind of clarifications, and we wouldn't send the mapping out to landowners because, again, they won't be able to see it. It's that minor.
Can I just ask a question here before we get into that? This council and all councils experience the never ending, I didn't get the information, I didn't know about the meeting, I didn't. When you send this request out for something as important as changing the zoning on lands wherever they are, do you send it by registered mail to verify so that 3 years later, as Mr. Palmer's pointed out, somebody comes in and says, oh, I didn't know anything about that? So then we can go back to that document and say, actually, you were sent it, da-da-da-da-da-da. It would end a lot of discussion and argument and hard feelings. How do you do that? Or you just send it by mail and hope they read it?
We send it by mail. We do keep a record of, who it was mailed to through the mailing labels that's saved as part of the file. But no, it's not done by registered mail.
Is there any chance you can make that change just to save arguments? I know I'm a guy that I don't read 90% of my mail.
I think,
That would be a cost.
That would be
yeah,
a
I
massive
think
cost.
it would be a significant cost with the number of letters we'd be sending out. So I think at a minimum, Hannah had noted yesterday for me that I think the number of letters potentially is like 500 letters at a minimum
And you're looking at a cost of an increased cost about 5 times.
for registered.
It'd be between $5 and $7, I guess, to probably send the size of the letter. We're talking about a normal stamp's $1. So you're adding a significant cost. I don't disagree with the Reeves comment. I mean, that would solve a lot of the problems, but the question would remain, is that solution worth the additional cost factor, especially when you're talking about some of these issues where they're really minor in nature? And I mean, you don't want to pick and choose. You don't want to change the process for everyone, because then it doesn't become an easy process as well. Like, you don't want to only send registered mail to the ones that are not minor affected or whatever, because then it becomes somebody's got to handle that letter, those 500 letters, to know which ones are go out and which ones don't register, and it's a problem, I would say.
And we have some slides about the letters later on, but our suggestion was that we would send letters to everyone in the township, letting them know that the 5-year review was underway. For those individuals who have a significant property-specific change, we would send an additional letter that explained that their property had a proposed change, and we would send them a color map of their property with the change highlighted, so that they can see what area is affected by the change and the nature of the change. Is it changing to agriculture? Is it changing to natural environment? If you're in town, maybe it's changing to residential. So that's our process, so that, again, we're providing that level of transparency to all ratepayers, and then an additional level of detail to those ratepayers whose properties are involved with a potential change.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Kevin, and then. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Reeve. The difference between from 66 up to 2020, do you get notifications if farming practices change on a farm, like they may have cleared another swath of trees, expanded agricultural land? There's a process that has to come up, that comes to you, that tells you of that change and goes into the mapping? Or is it just if you catch them?
So,
There's a lot of if you catch them right now.
So I completely understand. I grew up on a farm myself. So yes, I understand that farmers might square up the corner of a field. I understand that there may be lands which were previously not farmed, and with the, dramatic rise in the price of cropland, that there might have been areas of your property which you previously, in previous generations, your grandparents, your parents, might not have chosen to farm. But now, because of the cost and commodities and everything else, you might choose to make the investment in that area in terms of tiling, and make land which was perhaps looked at as less productive into more productive land. So that happens across the landscape probably every day. And that's part of normal farm practices. What's different when it comes to woodlands is where there are violations against the forest conservation bylaw. So if there are clearings of areas, it has to be more than an acre, and the trees have to meet a certain diameter of size to be considered a violation under that bylaw. That is the only time where we might become aware that there was a significant change on the landscape. And in those cases, I'll be honest, recently every charge has been settled in the county's favor. There has been replanting plans agreed upon in those settlements. And so oftentimes we're not changing the mapping on those properties because the areas that were cleared are in fact going to be replanted again. Okay.
Pretty straightforward answer.
Sorry, go ahead, Trevor.
The other, I guess the question that I had was, or just a comment as to the planner's process. If the owners aren't going to get the, if they're gonna get the map and it's not going to be able to be visible, meaning a minor change, I would understand that, I'm not sure it would be valuable in order to send a notice at all, in my mind, from other than just saying, you're sending a notice to everybody anyways of the 5-year official plan amendment. If you're adding to their process or taking it away, I mean, if it's minimal and it's not going to change really the aspect of what they're going to be doing with that land, then really it's clerical in nature and not necessarily affecting them. But I think the biggest concern of this whole thing, and I hear over a number of issues, is zoning becomes, well, I can do something or I can't do something. And that is the question that always begs the question about, if you're changing something, what does that mean to me in the sense of, what can't I do now that I was able to do before? Not necessarily meaning I was doing it, it's just I want to know what I cannot do and what I can do. So, I mean, if we're talking a minor in nature change, like, I mean, and I'm leaving it to planners to determine what that minor change is. I suspect when it's a sliver and you can't see it on the map, that's a minor change in my opinion as well. And I don't know that it would be any value to provide that information if you're just going to get 100 calls that says, why did you send me this? There's nothing on my report that tells me anything different.
And I would completely concur. When it's a linear change less than an acre on a 100-acre farm, it's truly not visible on the map. And so in those cases, if council was comfortable, we can simply not make those changes and just abandon all of those sort of shadow effect changes and just move forward with the ones that are more significant in size.
So I'd like to hear from the farmers on the council on that one. This affects your
through you,
land.
Reeve.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yes, you say that's minor, it's an acre, but the way I look at it, if that gentleman or lady was coming up to wanting to sell that farm, that's still a half an acre difference. What's a half an acre worth, when they put it on a cost? That's why I feel they should be getting a letter about it. Just to cover that, because there are dollars involved on a sale that could happen, like on these little slivers you're talking about. That's just my thought on it.
Okay.
But you're not, I think I know where you're going to go, Trevor. But you're not changing the 100 acres you're selling. You're still selling 100 acres.
No, it
But,
doesn't
I mean,
sound
they
that way.
sell a land on per workable acre.
Okay.
And these 0.9 acres, things like that can make a difference in a final sale.
Okay, Trevor?
But I think my question though is, to Councillor Heffer's question, is us changing the zoning doesn't change the use of it.
That's right.
Like, I mean, so if you're selling 95 workable acres today, and we change, and the zoning isn't changed for this minimal or whatever, it's still 98 acres workable. Us changing the zoning doesn't change whether it's workable or not workable. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I just.
That's right.
My concern, and the reason why I asked the question about GPS located, is because if we don't change, if these minimal changes don't get changed, right? If they don't get changed at all, then, and a landowner wants to do something at that area and land, now planning and stuff are going to be able to interpret, using what's been discussed, and interpret whether there needs to be a discussion about that zone, or it's a conversation like, have a conversation with Maitland Valley or whatever. It's not going to determine or impact potentially a development that they want, because we aren't changing anything. But the GPS location thing, it's not GPS located. So it's allowing planning to take a visual idea of what the zone is and make a necessary change, or make necessary aspects to what that zone is. I mean, I want us to be less constrictive than constrictive, but I also want us to make good use of planning and resources time. And if it's not going to change, 98% of what agriculture or residentials are going to do with that land in a minimized perspective, what's the purpose of changing it? There's no there's no grant of effect, because the landowner isn't going to, it's not specifically located that, oh, I'm going to go on that piece of property and now that area right there has been designated agriculture versus natural environment. It's not that precise in what I'm hearing.
I'm going to let Denise answer that, and I'm going to go to you, Kevin. Chris?
I would agree. If I look at this example, like, again, we're looking at the correction here involves 0.2 acres, right? Because we're taking away 7 on one side and we're adding 9 to another side. But in fact, at the end of the day, nothing changes on the ground. The trees are still along this side where they've always been, and there's no trees along here, and there's no and we'll get rid of that. So that's, I think what it comes down to, these are just, they're so minor in my mind. We could simply abandon all these changes, not make them either way, and just leave it as it is, and it would make no material difference. So that, again, to use Trevor Seep's, or Deputy Mayor Seep's words, it would make better use of resources in terms of staff time, because I certainly don't want to be in a position of saying to a landowner, yes, we're removing what was a shadow effect on one side of your forest and adding a shadow effect on the other side. I think they're going to say that that's perhaps not a good use of time.
Councilor Palmer?
Okay.
Yeah, I think this example, I don't know if the same owner has both sides of the fence line there or not. So if there's a net difference, we don't know if there's a loss or a gain. Anyways, any change, even an acre, it goes from agriculture, that tax amount, to woodland, which is different. It'll affect them. Yeah, small, but still, I think the landowner needs to know. And according to what Councillor Heffer was saying, he was on a good roll there. Absolutely. 1 acre could be $15,000, and doesn't matter if it's farmed. It's designated woodland. So on his deed, that's how it comes out. So no, it's still important. Don't limit how important any change is, please. Change is change. And if it's the cost of a letter, give it to the person. And then they can decide if it's, oh, well, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, that's his decision, but maybe someone will. So I think they need to know.
Thank you very much. Councilor Van Henderson?
Yeah, I was just a little bit thinking about this because on our taxes, we don't differentiate if your land is the quality of your land, if it's naturally a hazard or natural environment, or there's difference between farm and agricultural land, but I'm not sure about if there's difference in if you have creek tree land and it's natural environment. And it only comes up in sales if there is if you're going to change it, like I don't know if it's an added value if you make the shadow change. I don't know.
Well, why don't we think about that point, and just in the interest of time, we'll move on. We will come back to that a little bit later in the, I think we've showed examples of the minor changes that we've identified. So here's an example here, and this is the existing designation. As we can see, there's a large portion here which is designated natural environment, but is in fact a cropped field. Again, this is the Valley Lands example. So the Valley Lands extended beyond into this land, which is why we believe it was designated. And so we'd like to, this is showing the extent of the actual floodplain. And so again, when we look back through time, this has been farmed for a very long time. And so that's an area where we agree that this should be removed from natural environment and should be put into agriculture. So all of these large areas in red. There's a small area in orange here, which is trees, And so we would recommend that that go from agriculture to natural environment. And this is a lot line, so I can appreciate what Councillor Palmer was saying in that, so for this person, they're seeing, going back to agriculture, a little bit of natural environment here, going back to agriculture. Their neighbor, again, going back to agriculture, this little piece going to natural environment. But systems, right? The natural systems don't generally follow property lines. They're not straight lines, so we're trying to accurately map the feature, and it will fall onto different properties accordingly. Okay. So this is existing designation here. So this is an example of where we would want to introduce a flood overlay. So this is the flood hazard mapping provided by Maitland Valley. And so what it indicates is that this is an area along what I assume is the Maitland here, and it does flood seasonally. So what it would mean on the designation is that this area would have a flood overlay added, and it would be an indicator to the farmer that that's not a great place to build a building. Most times farmers would concur. They know their land, they know which areas would be suitable for building, so it's not typically an issue. So this is a proposed change from agriculture to agriculture with flood. And again, that's the new floodplain mapping that we are bringing in. And again, we're trying to increase the transparency of which areas of the township are suitable for development and construction, and which areas are suitable for agricultural practices, but not necessarily for construction. Thank you.
So just moving on, so this is an example of where another instance of a common trend that we saw is mature plantations that were probably not captured when the initial designations were proposed. So this is an example of a property that, this is the 2020 aerial imagery. So you can see there is a large portion of a woodlot that currently is not designated. So again, as I mentioned before, as part of the technical mapping, we do also have a layer that outlines all the specific community types. So we see that this area here is considered what's called a mature plantation. So that typically would be something that would get picked up and would get recommended for approval. And that would be something we would also look at. So just looking through the historical aerials, you can see in 1999, there was not a lot of naturalization on the property. It looks like it might be the early start, but
the 99s were also very difficult. They're very blurry, so they're hard to interpret. So something didn't naturalize that quickly. If 2006 it had that much cover, chances are they were there in the 1999s, but we couldn't see them because of the quality of the air photos. So that's the other main difference, is that the quality of the air photography we get now is just, it's like light years different. And so that's why, again, we can be more accurate.
thank you. And then you can see in 2006, it's progressively naturalizing. Here is showing the 2015s. And then in terms of the recommendation with the 2020 aerials, so as mentioned before, highlighted in orange, this would be an area that would be recommended to be included in the natural environment mapping. And that's something that staff is also looking for, is recognizing those areas where there was a conscious decision made not to crop in that area or to have a plantation there, and then recognizing that that is also part of the natural environment landscape and should also be captured in the mapping. So that is something else that we're looking for. Just moving along, there are examples of other mature plantations that have already been captured in the natural environment mapping. So you can see this is another property, and sometimes you can tell if it's a plantation versus a woodlot just because you can kind of see the rows of where the trees were planted. So that's usually a good clue if it's a plantation as well. So as mentioned before, it is identified as a plantation here in the community. And then if we look historically over time, so 78, it might have been cropped. And then through time, there was clearly a conscious decision to allow the property to naturalize, to stop cropping the area, and to have a plantation. So here's 2006, and then 2015. And then in terms of our recommended proposal, so it is recommended, that the plantation is already recognized in the green, remain as is. But there also is another trend that we saw is there were some instances of areas being picked up close to dwellings in terms of if that person had any landscaping on their property. So staff also kept that in mind. Is that these are areas that also need to be looked at a little bit closer, because if someone just has a few trees beside their house, that's probably something where we don't want to pick up. So that would be something we would look at closer, and in this case, distinguish between what is landscaped and what is actually part of the natural environment.
System. Yeah,
feature.
we really try to back off from any existing building clusters because people need the opportunity to put on additions, to replace septic beds sometimes. We don't want to encroach where there's existing buildings. So we're very mindful of that. And again, we look site by site right down to this level. And we also look back through time to make sure that we're understanding what's happened. What's actually great about these area photography going back in time is when we did the ACW plan, we had the opportunity to share some of the historical areas with the landowners. And I received a really lovely note from someone actually just this week thanking me for providing them, because they had taken they wanted to take an environmental approach, and so they had planted trees, this woman and her husband, over the last, I think it was 30 years. And so for them to be able to see sort of how their property has changed through time, they took, kind of great pride in that and really enjoyed those pictures. So she told me they're actually getting them framed to hang them up in the barn, and I thought that was a neat story. So where the opportunity exists, if landowners are interested, we will absolutely provide them copies of their historic aerials if they're interested.
A question on when you're talking about the plantation, alternative crops are becoming quite more in the main front. Say if someone had agricultural land and they planted walnut tree or hazelnut trees for a business to harvest hazelnut, does that revert back to then natural, or put it in an apple orchard or something? Like you would come up as trees.
It would. And so that's why we're very careful. Christmas tree farms is one. We also watch for orchards. We watch for different types of horticulture that involves trees. There's a proper name for that, and it's escaping me at the moment. Agroforestry. So we are very mindful of that. What helps is that many of the planners, we've grown up here. So I know where the Christmas tree farms are in the area. And so it helps certainly to be able to check off, because you're right, there could be an error. And that's an example of where we could make an error, and then the farmer has a chance to come forward and say, by the way, this isn't a plantation, this is a Christmas tree farm. Oh, our apologies, we will absolutely take it off. So that's, again, the familiarity with the landscape is what I think is really helpful through this exercise.
Let me ask the question about, the public notice and all that other stuff. So let's use that as an example. Let's just use that as an example, that the mapping, everything goes through the process. It was actually designated as natural environment when it was agriculture. When it should have been agriculture because it was an alternative. If after the review is all done, there is the ability or the way for the landowner to get that zone physically changed. That's what they would have to go through an application process to do that. This review, in essence, is not costing the landowner anything other than in their tax dollars today, where if they don't see this review and this error happens, it could potentially, depending on what happens, it could cost some money in a relate, unless I would suspect that the county or the council is going to go back and look at it and say, that was absolutely not the intent, and that it would have to be council to waive those fees. It would have to be something that happens, but it's going to cost potentially landowners those issues. If that public consultation gets all the way through, and we approve a document that says, I'm going to change the X to the Y, and it's wrong in reality. Is that correct?
That is correct, and so that's why accuracy is the whole
Yep.
sort of name of the game. Okay, so let's talk about the notices. We've touched on it. So, individual letters with the maps to be sent to landowners, individuals with proposed mapping changes. We will also place maps of all the grid maps of the changes to be, they will be posted online, and they will be updated at a certain intervals. So what we had happen was, let's say for example, we post the maps up, somebody calls me and says, you know, Denise, that's actually my Christmas tree farm. And I say, okay, yeah, we will make a note of that. If they went to the mapping online the next day, it won't be updated yet. So I always put on the website, this will be updated at this next interval to let them know after that date, when you check back online, your Christmas tree farm would have come off the proposed changes, but we just can't do it every day, for example. So just making that aware. And then we want to send out that general letter to everyone to let them know there's going to be open houses. Please come talk to us. We're going to have one in Wingham. We're going to have one in Blythe. We're also available via phone, via email. Very, very willing to go out and do site visits. We also want to make some additional effort to make sure that we reach members of our Anabaptist Amish community here. And so we're very willing to go, as we do with nearly every 5-year review, we typically go and meet with the bishops or a subset of the group at one of the schools or, churches, wherever they would like to meet, and have that opportunity so it's a bit more convenient. We're also very mindful of planting season. So when we get to the open houses, we have a slide on that specifically. I just want to show an example first. This is an example of what the map would look like. And so it would explain, it would show their property with an aerial underneath to help them interpret it. It would show them the area that's currently designated. And in this case, it would show them the area that's going to be changed, subject to change. Black is going back to agriculture. Green is being added to natural environment. So, at a property scale, even though that's a small change, I would say that one is visible. It's when you get into these types of things, do you see that thin green line? That's when we got, I'll be honest, in the ACW, there was a couple like that, and we did have calls where people said, I don't see anything on my map. And so it's just, walking through that. Okay, so is the slide for the open houses maybe further on? Do we want to just jump ahead? And then we'll come back. We've sort of ended the part about the natural environment, agricultural part of the process, and then we'll go into talking more about the urban changes.
So I can speak to the dates for one on the slides. So as mentioned by Denise, so in terms of the next step in the process, we are going to be seeking direction from council to schedule public open houses. We are looking at the week of April 18th, and we have been able to confirm some venues. So right now, our proposed plan is that on, you just give me a moment to get my calendar up. I'll make sure I'm saying the right dates.
Again, April 18th, just while Hannah's finding that, we did really want to make sure that we had those open houses in advance of the planting season, and with the way the weather's looking, it looks like we will be okay the week of April 18th. And we're also being available at much longer hours than maybe we would have in the past. So we're available for full days as well as evenings. And then again, if those dates don't work, we can meet with them outside of those hours. So really trying to make ourselves available.
Thank you. So we are looking at also, in addition to having open houses in person, we will be proposing an online session on Wednesday, April 20th at 6 p.m. just to provide a bit of convenience for those residents that would prefer to have an online session. We anticipate the online session might be a little bit more formal. It might be a little less conducive to speaking one-on-one with landowners, but certainly helpful to provide information to the public. We are proposing that on Thursday, April 21st, that we would be in Blythe for that day. So in the afternoon as well as into the evening, and that would be at the Blythe Arena. And then Friday, April 22nd, that is our date proposed to have an open house session in Wingham for a portion of the morning and into the afternoon.
And that'll be at the Hot Stove Lounge at the arena.
What was the date of that, please?
Friday, the 22nd.
22nd, okay, thanks.
Sorry, I'll let you go back to the
Okay.
urban stuff.
Yep.
Sorry,
Oh, go ahead.
just while we were talking about it, I thought it might just make sense to kind of put some of those dates into council's mind. So we would need direction, as we said, we'll get to those later, but we will also be putting notices in the newspaper, sending out the individual letters, updating the information on the township website, making use of the township social media channels to get the word out. We've also sent letters to all the community stakeholders. Thus far, we've received confirmation we'll be meeting with the Threshers Group, the G2G, the Blythe Festival is interested in meeting with us. So the community stakeholders will likely have a one-on-one discussion with them because they have specific interests that they would like to discuss as it relates to the official plan review.
So just to continue on, there were some minor natural environment changes in the urban settlement areas, but overall, these were considered to be less overall. A lot of the mapping corrections that we made in Wingham and Blythe were along water courses, or for example, along the G2G Trail in Blythe, because there were a lot of mismatch between areas that were designated natural environment versus parks and open space. So a lot of the changes have recognized that existing parks or existing township property would likely go to parks and open space, and the G2G be recognized as parks and open spaces. One of the other large changes for the urban areas is recently the flood hazard mapping has changed along a portion of the Maitland and particularly in Wingham as per the updated mapping from the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority. So as Denise mentioned, similar to the areas in the East Wamanach Ward, we also want to also provide an overlay of existing designations indicating where there's a flood hazard, just to ensure that we're transparent with landowners that there is a flood hazard that exists here. And we find it's also a good reminder for them if they just happen to look at, the official plan mapping and they don't think to also look at the Conservation Authority mapping, it's a good signal in their minds that, oh, okay, I'm aware that there's flood mapping on my property, and I need to speak with Maitland Valley Conservation further. So that is the major changes in the urban areas. There are a few minor corrections as well occurring where we've noticed that designations aren't necessarily aligned with the parcel fabric. Half the property is designated, the other half doesn't have a designation. So just aligning that, because we do have access to to better tools in terms of aerial imagery and parcel fabric, just to align that. So at the time, as of right now, that is the major urban changes that we are proposing. But as my next slide will go over, we certainly intend to also evaluate the land use needs there later in the process. So I can just, would you like me to speak to this? I can speak to this.
Yeah, I can too as well. I think it's just about, some of these conversations, we've shown what staff have proposed as changes, but it's quite possible there will be additional changes, particularly in the urban areas, once we have a chance to speak to people. And so that's where we don't want to necessarily, make a change on someone's property without at least having that initial discussion with them about what their goals are for their property. Would they be open to a land use change? So it's about, having respectful dialogue with the public. And so then we would, after the open house, once we've had some of that dialogue, we would certainly provide an update to council to say, as a result of these discussions and further staff analysis, these are the changes that we'd like to propose in Blythe and in Wingham. We do have a few ideas and concepts which we will show council today for discussion purposes.
So one of the key considerations that we're keeping in mind while we're going through this process, and, you know, good timing with some of the preliminary data coming out of the 2021 census, is we are looking at the historical population percentage growth, which from 2016 to 2021 for North Huron was about 2.4%. Which is a little bit slightly higher than historically. I believe in the last census from 2011 to 2016, it was 1%. So that is something we are keeping in the back of our mind as we're going through this analysis, is just looking at historical data as well.
So again, when we look at Blythe, there are certainly some areas that came to mind when I started to look at the designations as they are, and there was a few errors. And so I'll speak to a couple of them now. Here at the ends of Dinsley Street, what we see is lands that are currently designated community facility in orange. But that's actually part of a larger parcel that's otherwise designated residential. And in our perspective, we believe that a residential designation would be more appropriate on those lands than community facility. There's quite a lot of community facility lands in this area in Blythe, and we don't feel that that parcel is necessarily the right place or necessary to have. So that's a change, for example, that we would be notifying the landowner and wanting to have a conversation with them to see whether or not they would be interested. Further, in this area, there's a portion of lands here that are owned by the Threshers Group. And so that would be part of the conversation we'd be having with them. These are the lands obviously owned by the township that have been since developed here in this back corner for the outdoor festival stage. And so it's the lands immediately abutting it. It's a small field. It's kind of, if you're familiar with that area of Blythe, it's actually a great tobogganing hill. But it might be an area that might be conducive to a residential extension of Dinsley Street to come out and then to hook down and connect where you can see there's been a road stub area left here. So that's an example of where we've identified a potential change for Blythe. As well, what we note is that this property, so it's sort of this sort of wing, if you will, on the west side of Blythe. What you'll notice with this designation is that it immediately abuts the Threshers property, and it doesn't have road frontage. So I'm not sure as to the reasons historically why this area was designated in this fashion, but what I can say is based on development standards today, this property would be very difficult to designate because it has no road frontage. So that's again a property where we think that a reconfiguration of the designation might make a lot more sense and meet the township's goals.
Just a question through you, are the roads, the streets in the Thrashers or township owned or land there, are they not permanent streets? Like they're
No. So that's something the municipality could consider through, now that I understand you've done a recreational master plan. Should you want to see full municipal streets extended, that would involve typically a municipal EA process to first evaluate the appropriateness of the land and then work through the approvals process for the building of roads through those lands.
Because I was always told that during special events, the roadways there are patrolled by the Ontario Provincial Police, and the roads there are subject under the Highway Traffic Act. Like for not being able to like walk down the road with a beer in your hand during when a camping season is there.
That might be a bylaw, or in regards to, because it's a public event. I would defer to CAO Evans on that.
I thought they were.
Yeah, through your worship. So again, my understanding is that, I mean, the property is owned by the township. And in terms of, so those roadways or pathways, we don't maintain them, for example, through the winter season. So from that perspective, in terms of public roadways, if we wanted, in terms of to make them public roadways, that's certainly something that can be discussed. It does change them. We do have standards for our roadways in terms of 66 feet, for example, and curbs and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, that's certainly a conversation if council wants that we can have. In terms of the police patrolling, I know that we have, you know, reached out to the OPP to, you know, to go on to the property during the event and to do some patrolling from a security perspective. But in terms of, you know, if somebody was speeding down a roadway, you know, this is just my own thoughts in terms of, I don't think the OPP would have the authority to lay, for example, a speeding charge. But
Just to clarify my intention on it, wasn't to get into that. No, what I was clarifying is if there are roadways there, if one was designated and brought up to standards, that is access to that property through township.
It could be, though not without a significant amount of investment, where if we were to massage the designation such that it had road frontage onto County Road 25, that might be a more economical way, and that long-term, you're right, there could absolutely be a plan, apologies, just turn it off, that there could be a way to connect it back into the lot fabric, which would be ideal from a planning standpoint, but it's having that broader community discussion about the Threshers lands, the way in which they have served the community, what is the vision for how they will continue to serve the community's interests. And it's possible that a municipal road is part of that vision, but I wouldn't want to, you know, presuppose that as part of the 5-year review.
Is that chunk to the last chunk on the left there, is that not private property?
It is private property.
Okay, yeah.
It's designated community facility. And again, I don't know the history as to how that came to be.
But what you're suggesting is we could have residential there off Highway 25, and then as time went by, if for whatever reason we can actually have the hookups there without obstructing the Threshers from the work they're doing now. I think that's the way I understood that, yeah.
I pulled up.
Ladies, there's coffee down there anytime you guys want to take a break while the coffee's hot, and we'll,
What if we went through Blythe and then took a break?
sounds good.
Okay.
Just what I was thinking.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Riveli. Within these mapping, there's on the bottom left, there's a white area still underneath the community facility. If somebody comes up and says, can we change that to industrial, whatever they propose, is that possible or not? That white area, yeah, where you,
This white area,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So this is currently outside the settlement area of Blythe. And so in our evaluation, we need to be very clear that we have strong rationale for the expansion of the settlement area. So when I say massage, the designation, what it might mean is we might remove the portion immediately along G to G because it's impacted, as you can see, by a bit of floodway. And we might then, you know, remove those lands from the back and sort of add them to the front, which is a net zero gain and a net zero impact on terms of farmland. So when we talk about expanding the settlement area, it is possible. We just have to have very strong reasons because the protection of farmland is something else that we really want to keep top of mind. So just moving through the rest of Blythe, for example, I'll use this property, for example. It's actually owned by one of my family members, and it is a very large parcel in Blythe. But if you're familiar with it, it was a doctor's home in years past. It has a large pond in the middle of it. It only has one residence, but in fact, the way in which the topography is, there's no opportunity for more units on that property, save for, you know, maybe one infill lot. So when you look at the evaluation of vacant or available lands, you have to be very careful. You can't just look at this map and say, oh, okay, well, that's 6 acres that only has one house on it. You have to look at it and say, no, that's 6 acres that can really only have one house on it. You know, maybe a converted dwelling someday if they wanted to, but you know, it's limited. So we have to be very mindful and doing that close evaluation of where do we actually have vacant acres for development left. Certainly this property at the end of this street here, some people refer to as the Jackson Farm, that certainly is an area that's available for development. As we talked about this little parcel here, this piece here is available for residential development in the terms that it is vacant today. But we have to think about the fact that it's impacted by both a floodway and the setback to the sewage treatment plant. we can't have residences butting right up against it. So in fact, that's another place where we have to look at, well, in terms of the overall acreage, that actually can't be used for residential. This property is available for residential, as is this one, but there might be a more suitable way to structure this designation along North Street that might yield a more economical development. We also want to think about, from a highway commercial perspective, this at the north end of Blythe only has the opportunity to really take advantage of Highway 4 traffic, where, let's say, the parcel that Councillor Van Hitterson mentioned at this corner, this has more of a potential to see traffic from both directions, both Highway 4 and County Road 25. So, you know, we want to think about, where do we want to see highway commercial lands? Where are they going to best lend themselves to meet the needs of the community? And then, as Hannah said, we had a number of changes in through here. As you can appreciate from the air, the G to G in many cases looked like a completely treed over path. And now, with the way it looks, it's much more of an improved condition, and now we're comfortable designating that as a recreational corridor. Final change that I wanted to talk about, and this one is a little bit more sensitive in nature, in that this area is located within the municipality of Morris Turnberry. What I wanted to note for council is that this is an industrial designation. And so for an industry to only have access onto Dinsley Street, which is currently their only opportunity to reach a roadway, oftentimes for, you know, the large truck traffic that might be needed for that industrial use, it's not an ideal way to access a roadway, because then they have to come through town or alternatively go out, I suppose, out the other way. So this was an area that I looked at and thought, you know, if there was a willingness or an interest in speaking with Morris Turnberry about designating that lands within their official plan, it would allow road frontage onto County Road 25 for these industrial lands. What I also want to point out is that industrial, in this case, immediately abuts the residential lands that are designated for development on what has been called the Jackson Farm. There's a level of incompatibility, right, to have industrial right up against residential. So it may be such that these industrial lands don't really represent true potential for industry. And so I think this is it's a bit of a difficult scenario that we have here, and I want to have some discussions with the landowner so that I can have a sense of their goals long-term and how we might best meet them, recognizing that resolution may involve a cross-border solution. In terms of, you know, it's possible that the industry would enter their property from County Road 25, they would cross over what is lands within Morris Turnberry, and then enter into the development lands in North Huron.
Or we could switch that residential, you're saying?
Yeah. That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
It's possible, but this is your only industrial designated property in all of Blythe, other than Howson's.
How many acres is the industrial park?
I'm just eyeballing it. I think it's
It's big.
It's
15? Yeah.
at least 20. It's so Hubbard's is here, right? Hubbard's Rutabaga facility is right here,
Yeah.
and then this is immediately to the south.
Okay.
Excuse me,
That's not-
that gentleman wants to speak to you. That owns that, okay?
Wonderful.
That's not Hubbard land then?
No, it's
it
house.
No, it's house and land, yeah.
It's house.
Okay.
But that's not in North Huron, or not part of North Huron.
No, it's not North Huron, is it not?
This portion is in North Huron.
Yes.
This is not. So this is where the original, when amalgamation was done, this is where the line was cut through here.
I
And
did
so-
not know that.
Pardon?
I didn't know that. I knew that sliver, that quarter pie-shaped piece has road access to highway, or to County Road 25.
The pie
The little, you see where the railroad tracks used to be there? There's a
Oh,
little
yes.
there's a little
Yeah.
pie shape there. That little pie shaped one in there is
Oh.
a separate piece of property,
Yes, that's right.
owned by a farmer on the other side of Hubbard's.
Okay.
And it does have access to there is a road allowance.
Okay.
That piece actually goes out, you got it marked there as highway commercial, but there's that portion of the land goes right to the,
Okay, I will check that. We can just make a note of that, just to double check the road allowances in this area. Is that Mr. Rin's
No, it used to be Kerrs, but I'm not sure. Oh, I know who owns it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the GIS.
It's the same guy that owns the,
It's Rin.
It is right.
is it right now?
Thank you.
Oh. The front piece.
Yep.
Yes.
That
Mr.
piece you're talking about, for sure.
Yeah, but there's actually a building on that, that sliver goes right out to the highway, because there's actually a cement little shed. It's just a little,
Okay.
just a road allowance.
Have to look next time I go by.
So
And-
Denise, just for clear, so I have it in my mind properly, Paul talked about there was somebody you were gonna talk to. Is that land in North Huron, or that land is in Morris Turnberry?
North Huron.
So we won't know what to do that till after you have that conversation.
That's right.
Thank you.
And
I think though, Reeve, I think we want to be very careful in the sense of, you know, having residential, although is key, I think, there has to be a decent balance of residential, commercial, and industrial. Because as we have found is, it's fine that, you know, today, society has not had a real concern about traveling for work, but I would argue, based on the last 2 years, that has significantly changed people's mindset about how far they're willing to travel for employment. And if we have available industrial land in the municipality that can serve the residents of that ward, it only begs the question, why do you come? Because I can get it all in a very small area of where I live. And I think we also have to recognize is we've had a population growth of 2.4% over the past 5 years. I know that's probably everybody's thinking, well, based on housing requirements and everything, that probably you're looking at more to be 5 to 7% probably going forward. We also have to recognize how many residential houses or lots that actually have ability to actually produce houses, and how many houses could that be, rather than, oh yeah, that looks great to be a residential place, then it sits for residential forever, and you lose the opportunity for industrial people to come into play to support residential development later. I think there has to be this delicate balance that we have to be very careful about when we say we want to convert something from industrial for residential, and understand that these buffers and everything has to be correlated, because if we just make a choice, you know, it's going to impact something else. It's going to impact something else, could be drastically, in how people look at that settlement area as it relates to residential.
the protection of employment lands is a provincial mandate, so we wouldn't be able to actually de-designate the industrial lands without, compensating somewhere else. If there was a better location for the industrial lands, that could be a conversation that we could have, but I agree, we want to have really thoughtful discussions, because I agree, we need to plan for a 20-year future for all of the land uses, and not just put our blinders on to residential because of, well, we know we need more residential. It doesn't mean that we don't also need those other land uses, so I like the word balance.
And I would, before I hand it over to Kevin, I would also say from my time on council, the last time I sat on council, we didn't have any jobs. So in a decade, it's changed. Now we need people for the job, so you got to keep playing that as time goes by. You just can't. I totally agree with what you're saying. Go ahead, Kevin.
That's where you read. On the map there, where you're talking the road access almost to the industrial land there, Wellington Street and King Street are both the same length. The street does not.
Okay, I think what it's showing is a road allowance there. So the Wellington has a road allowance that goes all the way through. I don't know that King,
No.
in terms of the historical mapping,
No,
had
there's a
it as
barn
well.
right there.
Yeah, there's the residents and, yep. The ponds and whatnot, so.
But it's just deceiving that is all the same property, is it not?
Yes, so we could, and that's something we could think about, is do we want to do some hatching that better distinguishes where there's open roads as opposed to unopened road allowances? Because even back in this neck of the woods, I think there was a couple that also appeared open when in fact they are not. Now, one other property, just so council's notes of it in Blythe, just on the edge of Blythe, we have a Pioneer Cemetery that has not, it had not been picked up in the mapping, and the mapping wasn't quite correct. So it does live outside the settlement area, it's right here, but just wanted council to make note that we have corrected that and picked up that Pioneer Cemetery as a community facility.
Denise,
Yes.
through you, Reeve.
Go ahead.
That part, you're really close. It's residential right now, right there. You said it doesn't qualify to be really residential, right? Because it needs a buffer and all that business.
The east portion, yes, west portion.
Oh, some of it could then.
Some of it could, absolutely. This portion up here, provided that the floodplain can be mitigated, or any kind of flood hazard information can be mitigated, yes. I believe the east half could be developed. It's that the most western portion has to maintain that buffer.
Okay, could it be switched to commercial, or the buffer still stands for that as well?
The buffer still stands, and I mean, it's difficult because then all of a sudden we have commercial enterprises in what would otherwise be people's backyards. That's not always very conducive. It might be an area, for example, when they do the residential development, let's say they need to have a stormwater management pond. They could locate the pond in what, let's say, for example, this was the lowest corner of the land. Well, they can put the pond in the buffer. They could maybe leave some open space in the buffer as part of the design of the residential area. It just can't be where the houses are.
Okay.
So, again, we also want to think about growth planning. Again, farmland protection is important, but also infrastructure planning. And so before we leave Blythe, we did want to go to this map just to show and council where you have existing infrastructure. So water is blue, and I appreciate that's a bit hard to see, and the green is the sewer, sanitary sewer. And so when you think about where your sewage treatment plant is, for example, physically, we have to think about, well, where's the most economic place to have growth? It's really more of a question for your engineers than your planners. But it's why we should be integrated when we have these discussions, right? We should be having the discussions with the engineers so that, and again, Hannah and I, in thinking about, well, let's designate land way over here. Well, that's fine. We could do that for residential purposes, but it's potentially going to be more expensive than other areas would be. So that's why when we do growth planning, it's important not to do it in a silo and really to have that integrated approach with infrastructure planning. And that would apply same to when we think of the Thresher's lands, for example, there's limited infrastructure going into those lands today.
So Denise, my apologies for having to step out for a few minutes, but just going back to Blythe, at the north end of Blythe behind the fire department, are you designating that highway commercial, industrial, or can we designate that section residential? And I'm talking about North Street North. So you're going into the lagoon, and the lagoon is down at the end on the left-hand side. It's actually at the top of your map. It's the long yellow piece. So you have two different colors there. You've got the front. What did you, on the highway there. What's that designated as?
This is highway commercial along
Okay.
the highway
Yep.
with residential in behind.
Okay. And you feel that the highway commercial that far north would work for Blythe because really you've got an intersection at the other end, even though we only own 1/4 of it. Would you think that would be a wise designation rather than residential, considering all the residential that's going across the street? Just throwing that out there.
I want to be thoughtful about it. We do already have the storage business, so I want to be, to not leave it in sort of an island unto itself. The other conversation I would want to have is with County Public Works about, how many entrances would they realistically allow in this section? Does it lend itself to a larger highway commercial use? Or again, would they be more apt from a technical perspective because they're doing, or anticipated to do some upgrades at this intersection? Might this location actually be better for highway commercial? So those are the conversations that I have identified as next steps that would inform my recommendation on this north end.
Yeah, appreciate that, because that was going to be my next comment, is we are making a big change at the south end of Blythe, so you don't want to count on too much land there until we talk to the Works Department at the county and find out what's left.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Why don't we take a break there? When we come back, we'll talk about Wheaton.
Thank you. Good.
And I'll just leave the live stream running.
Sure.
Okay.
Just so everybody knows the live stream is running. Coffee, everybody is just down on the corner down here. Kev, can you hit the light there, please? You ladies want to pause?
I didn't realize that farm was in two different municipalities. That's why I didn't think it was.
Well, you see the house in Mills behind us, that she just wants, he's down the road now, and I said, don't worry, it's not Chloe. He wants to talk to her, because he mentioned something to her. Because it's his land, like they just, that building you talked about here,
Well,
they bought that Kerr farm,
they
right?
bought the Kerr farm, but if you blow it up, that little sliver.
Yeah, oh yeah.
by the road tracks, that little shed there, and this laneway are part of that triangle back and behind of this part. So this is a triangle,
Yeah.
this is a, that's, because it's one of the Kerr sons that, when they sold the farm, was gonna sever this piece off. And build a house back there because it had highway.
That's going to have to her question here, because I didn't know that was
No, they're not.
Trinidad land at the bottom there. I found that out
Well,
today.
this is, she's saying this isn't. It's just,
No, but right there, below the blue, down to the highway, she said it comes down so far and then cuts across. But I'm not sure where that is she's talking about, right?
yeah, because this farm goes right over the highway.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen these trucks in
Yeah, well,
right
that's what I
there.
meant, like, this is,
Even though.
yeah, I knew.
Oh, so you're over here then,
I knew,
okay.
I knew this was Turnberry. Like, there's the Kerr farm.
Yeah,
I knew this was Turnberry,
right.
because the farm's in Turnberry, because the house is in Turnberry. But I didn't realize that this was North Huron.
Well, yeah, but he told me that. He said, like, I had to send him down the picture, and he realizes now. He says, no, that's our land, and he thought it was agriculture. Like,
Oh, I see what you mean.
know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like, so he just let her talk to her and then figure it out, like, but I didn't realize that MT owned that little white empty block
Yeah,
there.
if they own this, oh, that picture, they own, like, from the same, right, the end of this street came straight out, so that's where that lot cuts off.
Okay,
Well, no, I'm just saying by her picture,
yeah,
that lot cuts off.
yeah.
But I knew this farm was in Morris Turnberry.
But so much of that, though, up there, the blue, when they talked to him and decide that, like, he didn't think Hubbard would want to sell. He said, he'll probably want a thing or something. Like, no one knows, eh? But, they're just going to have to talk and,
They only own that front part.
yeah, up at the top part. And
Yeah,
then
they
there's a
only-
little house, a little thing off of it, a caboose or something off of the corner of it, on the Hubbard part.
No, that's the bed and breakfast. That's the old railway station.
Yeah. He says that's off of Hubbard's. He said that's off of Hubbard's. I'm just going to what he said.
No, Pete owns it, yeah.
So he wasn't believing me. I said, well, finally I got a picture to send it down to him. He couldn't believe that, eh?
Well, I live right here, and I didn't even know that.
You
See it on my back. See it on my backyard. I never knew that, but I knew that. I knew this little piece because I.
Yeah, I have to look at that.
Sure.
I'd need to touch base with Darcy, but my understanding though is that the taxation is on the entire parcel. It doesn't divide out between the agricultural.
The designation.
Okay. So he could come to you that day and ask you about
Taxation.
Sure.
that when,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, 'cause
again, I'll confirm with Darcy, that's my understanding. Taxation does not affect this. But I think their point though is that in terms of them, in terms of the farmer selling
He's saying
something,
here's the double.
Somebody's gonna have.
yeah, it's a whole lot.
Okay.
Like you're talking infill.
Right, yeah.
Sell a piece
So
of.
I'll just tell him to come.
Okay.
Well, he's my
I
guy,
tell
so,
you.
Okay, yep, he can reach out and we'll take a look and see what the bylaw is for minimum lot sizes.
Yeah,
Because
right,
often
right.
too,
But
a
you
lot
see,
of.
it is a little bit bigger, right? It's that one, right?
actually going to say,
Yeah, right under the L and L frame.
tell me that
Oh, okay, right there.
But you see, it's one,
deep.
it's one of those where they plow that road there.
actually
like,
designated
Oh, okay.
as far as it is.
Yeah, so that's the thing. If it's
They
not
keep
on
on it saying that it could be a
They're not gonna check that. If they do, good for them. I need somebody to sell that to me. It doesn't, it seems.
Okay.
come.
We'd have
seems
to
like
see
you-
what
Yeah,
you want
like
to
it may not even
accommodate,
work.
'cause
to a
the-
thing that's
with the
not
configuration,
complex.
it's unfortunate it's not the other way. 'cause-
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll confirm that. But my understanding in terms of MPAC and classifications, the classification for the parcel would be agriculture with the exception of the residence. Any residential on the property falls into the residential
Which is
classification.
1 acre of the property.
I don't believe it separates it out between natural environment, agriculture, and residential.
It just says
I think it's
residential,
agriculture.
agriculture.
That's my understanding. But again,
From a solar, so if we take off a minor change in this, it's not going to be taxation.
but I think their point is
Their
it
point is
does
real
affect.
estate. If I sell a piece of property, if I designate it, I change it.
But they're saying, I think their point is in terms of, so going back to 125, so 124. So if it's 125 acre parcel and 124 is workable and one is natural environment, okay? Then let's say we switch. So that has a value on it of 124 times the 20,000, one times the 1,500.
has the
But
ultimate
if you
authority.
go, if that changes, then suddenly becomes.
Extreme circumstance
It's
that
that
is deemed to be in the
differential
public
between
interest. County council
20,000
could unilaterally
versus the
go in and
1,500.
designate
So
the property.
that.
Well, the bottles are shrinking.
That
Acreage.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that understanding.
That's actually real estate.
That's but I'm saying,
But the county would have the
if
authority.
today,
Interesting.
It would be sold at 15 for 20,000.
Because we do plan for the
and today, on paper,
demonstrate, this is an
I'm
opportunity.
changing.
Hannah, the reason
So that bump out on
Still 125.
that property there, the thrashers there, is that in a field or is that all part of the
sometimes
open area of the
liver
park?
could be on here in the shadow, so it could make the difference of
125 workable land.
an acre or two. Like, I think for mine, a guy told me this, that he had
This part here where she says it's bumped out? I think what they were doing, they were planning on expansion.
That's the only reason why I brought that up, just to clear up.
Yeah, and it's certainly. good
See how many trailers there are on
some of those
thrashers?
things.
And then, if
Now the trailers are getting bigger.
we do it, we don't have to do it once, right? And then it's going, everything's going to be finalized. That's why I mean, that should be always with the deed or whatever.
Yeah, I'm not, so typically, my understanding is typically the official plan doesn't, because they're not open. Separate
Okay.
information. What I don't know is, I don't know if they consider that. I'm not sure, but
No, but that's the reason why it's coming like that.
yeah.
Done this thing 42 times, not a problem.
Because I got a little bit of
Down here, and I try to pull East Drive up, and it won't let me in.
Yeah, and again,
Do you know how
It's what
frustrating
I'm
it is to
thinking back.
really be close
from an
to
implementation
a meeting?
perspective,
And it's, I think it's my,
Yeah, maybe let me see it.
like meters.
I just changed mine 2 weeks ago, used it for 2 weeks without a problem. And all of a sudden you get here today and it's 19.
because the pictures are so, as you say,
I think it might be actually mine. I think it's that right there that's wrong. Shouldn't that be my email?
All right, Cal.
It needs to be
That area? Yeah. But I didn't know about that piece on the highway. That what, which is not ours.
Yeah, this actually, that little piece here?
Yeah.
Yeah, this here, yeah, but that little piece, it comes right out. But
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that one either. I thought that was all because that's part of the curb line.
designated.
Yeah,
I thought that was all,
yeah. Oh, no.
Oh, you get in?
That's actually houses.
We better get started again here, though.
Yeah, from the curse.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we can, sorry, guys.
So we on camera, we did all that?
Yeah, it's been live full time.
Okay.
I was actually just going to grab a water.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely, go ahead.
Around the campaign, somebody
See
thought,
that, the bottles are shrinking.
and she's lived here 8 years.
It's like,
Her husband,
but beard gets bigger,
So
Coke gets smaller.
60 feet from the,
They don't want to give you so many calories.
You might
Drink them.
What's that? Oh, that's even better.
How long do you think we own? We're planning for half a day.
Okay, that's fair.
9 to 12 is what we were planning for.
Might not go.
You're good.
I'm not sure if you want to also dim the lights again, if that works for everyone, if there's a preference. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as mentioned, just moving along, we also will be looking slightly at Hutton Heights. One of the major text changes that council will note in the policies in terms of Hutton Heights is just recognizing the direction council has given to invest in servicing in Hutton Heights, and recognizing that upon, having full services, that Hutton Heights would also be considered a primary settlement area, just due to the servicing status that's intended for the area. Just to provide some perspective on the existing designations in the Hutton Heights settlement area. So we do have lands adjacent to the river located here that are currently designated natural environment. Again, as part of this process, we are going to be reviewing which lands are considered hazard versus natural environment in this area. Council will note that the sewage lagoons are located right here. So keeping in mind that there is, a required buffer area, in my discussions with BM Ross, I understand that to be 200 meters. So that is why, as a potential buffered land use, there was a proposal to have lands designated as parks and open space, so that we would have the 200-meter buffer to residential. It's certainly the intent that these lands would continue to be designated for residential. That is our thought initially. There is a community facility property in Hutton Heights, so the church in the area. So that is something we would also seek to probably maintain, recognizing that at this point. And then there is a small portion of existing highway commercial businesses on the south here. So with Hutton Heights, again, this will be something we'll evaluate a little bit further, but in terms of the existing designations, it's likely there won't be any major changes other than, perhaps recognizing the new floodplain mapping.
Mm-hmm. I think one other thing that's important to note is about, community conversations that can come out of these processes. So for the recreational master plan, for example, it identifies that the soccer fields, which are currently located in Hutton Heights on the church property, may be utilized into the future, or it may be such that the township would like to locate soccer pitches on their own township-owned lands. And so that might be a question, for example, coming from the church is, do you still have need of our soccer fields? In which case, my guess would be they're probably happy to still have them be used. If the township was ever going to indicate, no, we do not want to make use of your soccer fields, then the church might want to know that so they could think about, well, do they want to continue on with the community facility designation on that portion of the property? Or would they potentially want to explore a different use now that, we have this infrastructure improvement happening? They're no longer going to require a septic bed on that property. And so it allows them to consider. And so that's what I believe for Hutton Heights, is that with the substantial investment that council is making in this portion of the community, that by the time we do the next 5-year review, it will be, very interesting to see the rate of change in Hutton Heights. And at that point, we may consider an expansion further south if it's deemed necessary at that time. At that point, we could also evaluate whether the highway commercial designation on the south end continues to make the most sense, or perhaps it's only a portion of these lands, which is highway commercial, and the rest goes on to residential and then potentially beyond. So I do think Hutton Heights will be a very interesting one to watch for this next period, and then we'll be taking a much closer look at Hutton Heights in the next review.
Question? Through you, Reeve. Denise, you're mentioning soccer pitches. Are they, would one be allowed on the buffer area? I'm not sure if there's enough room there anyways, 200 meters, but.
To measure, I believe the perspective from the engineers was that you could have a recreational use within the buffer area. There will be times potentially that odor might be experienced, but not at a rate that would be, offensive given the short period of time somebody might be there for a recreational use, as opposed to a residential, more a full-time permanent occupation of the land.
Denise, just as we just spoke about, I just want to mention the fact that, and we just did speak about this, we're talking about 5 years down the road, looking at expanding south of Hutton Heights with the development going on in the Bruce and just simply people need people to work in the factories. You know the situation, you may or may not know the situation we're in here, where I think we're short between 80 and 100 people to keep our factories rolling right now. My concern is if you can't keep a factory rolling right now, it will disappear, and it won't go to Hamilton, it'll go to another country. So we want to make sure we can keep as many houses moving along as we can. Do you feel, after what we've been through as a town, as a council, pushing hard for 4 years, and it will probably be going into next year, maybe late this year, next year, before we even get our first house built in Hutton Heights? This was a 4-year journey. We're talking to contractors that are telling us, I think it's between 25 and 50 houses they're going to build a year out there. So it's a 4-year development, and in 4 years that will all be full. If we wait then 4 years or 5 years down the road, we're going to be behind the same 8 ball again. I would prefer that we look at the extension to the south of Hutton Heights, or anywhere we can, including in Blythe, and that's why I brought up Blythe, about the north end of Blythe. We need to prepare these lands for use and start now, because it took us 4 years. So, and again, I'm not a planner, maybe we went about, I just want that concern raised, that I think we're in a position in the world right now where we should be looking further out and moving faster to make it happen. I know we have to take into consideration such things as the A2A land, but in all honesty, I hope we can develop it one day. But again, I was there the day it was announced. I was at the meeting saying we were going to build whatever it was, 600 houses there, and the world was fine. And we all see where that went, and we all know where that is now. So I'm concerned that we sit on our hands again. We're just gonna, the northern part of Huron County is going to be devastated because we just simply don't have people, whether it's working on the farms or whether it's working in the factories. We're just not gonna, if we don't do something about it, we are going to be in a mess as time goes by. Thank you very kindly. Go ahead, who? Trevor?
So, yeah, Reeve, I don't disagree. I honestly don't disagree. The one thing that I will say is the caveat to Hutton Heights that has really caused us, if we would have had water and sewer there, it wouldn't be 4 years. Like, it wouldn't have been 4 years to develop that property if we would have had water and sewer there. So, I mean, we've had a significant investment to get water and sewer to a settlement area that we can get to. As we get there, and as water is extended to those places, it becomes easier to be developable. Sorry, my English is hard. But I agree. I mean, we have to recognize that, we need to make sure that we have water and sewer and infrastructure there before we will go through this whole great big process to make it residential, because what's the point? You can make it residential and have water and sewer 7 miles away, and it can't be developed until you get water there. So, I mean, as I think as Denise alluded to, this is a joint conversation with not only planning, but our water and sewer, BM Ross, as to say, where do we want development? And we need a plan, an infrastructure plan to get us that water and sewer to that area and what that investment's gonna be. I mean, that's the thing. And that conversation needs to be as well with the landowners of those pieces of property, because then they know, they know what our thought process is, then they can establish and understand, because a lot of landowners potentially may not even look at it to say, well, my piece of property could be residential, because there's no water or sewer anywhere near it, so they don't even think about it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kevin.
At the end of the day, is that designation not up to the consensus of council? Does council not have the ability to change or to designate land, give it its insignia, like whether we're going to say that we would like that industrial, we would like this piece residential?
Denise?
Yes. So it's absolutely, council are the decision makers. The planners are here to provide advice and recommendations that follow provincial policy. So what I can say about Hutton Heights is that in order to support a settlement area expansion, we would need to again have that strong justification as to the need for more lands to be removed from agriculture and go into development lands. As it stands right now, we cannot make that argument from a planning standpoint because the lands have not yet been developed. And so that's why, in my opinion, it would be premature to go beyond it, for example, to the lands to the south. Now, should council direct staff, we would like those lands designated, you are certainly within your rights and to do so, and we will make that change. So the difference, just so council's clear, the difference is that the County of Huron is the ultimate approval authority for this official plan. If you were to direct staff to make a change that we otherwise did not recommend, we would have to determine whether or not that's something we would then raise with County Council. So if, for example, this council directed us to, to designate, let's say 500 acres for residential development, that is something that as a professional planner, I would have to raise with County Council and say, County Council, this does not follow the planning recommendation. Do you wish to follow the direction of North Huron Council or the advice of the planning department? And that would be County Council's decision. If you were to suggest a minor change that was not recommended by staff, I think it's unlikely that I would raise it with County Council. And that's what can be difficult sometimes with Hannah and myself. We act as both the local planners and as the county planners. And so we have to wear those different hats at certain times. And I'll just be perfectly clear with council. If there's a decision that I will be raising with County Council, you will certainly know that first. There'll be no surprises.
So just, I just got one more question. So of course, my concern is being able to develop when we need to be able to develop. So if we make this 5-year official plan, and then all of a sudden 3 years from now we see, or 2 years from now we see the need to expand, I don't care where it is, don't even have to use land. Is it a difficult process to add it then, or should we be adding it now? And that's honestly where I'm going with this. If it's not a big deal and we see the need and we can make it work 2 years from now, that's great. But if we put this official plan in place now, are we putting up roadblocks that'll stop us from coming forward in 2 years saying, our development's full, we need to move forward in an area?
No, we could certainly do a locally initiated OPA to expand the settlement area boundary. It's not typically something that we've done outside of a 5-year review, but then I would say that the level of growth that we are anticipating for this area is also unprecedented in terms of what we've seen. So the short answer is no, it does not create a barrier. You can apply for an OPA in 2 years And then we would make that analysis at that time. Is that
So-
fair? Okay.
So just for clarity though, would that application have to be put forth by the landowner or the municipality?
Either.
So, I mean, that's the conversation that we're talking about, is because we don't own the land. If we don't own the land, we're not developing it, potentially, right? So we may want to do that, but that consultation will be with the landowner to understand how or what it's going to affect. So, I mean, I think we have to recognize that if we are going to do it outside of the official, the 5-year official review, that there is probably some costs there that either the municipality is going to take on with that consultation process, or the landowner themselves is going to have some cost to do some official plan amendment in one shape or form. I think I just want to make sure that's clear. I mean, it's easier if we own the land as a municipality, but if we don't own the land, we are not necessarily a barrier, but we're definitely not the shaker and mover of getting development done in those settlement areas.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Reeve. Deputy Reeves, I kind of alluded to it, but if we fell in love with a little chunk of property, a farm somewhere outside of our boundary, and we would like to see it as residential, what happens to the taxation, though? Like, if we saw 50 acres and it was farmland, that's how it's taxed, is farmland, and then we had it designated and it was agreed upon, it would have to be agreed upon by the landowner as residential, that changes his taxation hugely, does it not?
No, it does not.
How come?
It's taxed on the use of the land. If the use remains agriculture, the tax rate remains agriculture.
Okay, good, good.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
So, Reeve Bailey directed at the last, at the Section 26 meeting, that we would look at this portion of land at the corner of it's the southwest corner of the Highway 86, Highway 4 intersection. As per your request, I did follow up with several staff members at Maitland Valley Conservation Authority to determine the development potential from a technical feasibility standpoint. And we had received a number of different pieces of information back. And so firstly, they talked about the fact that there's a differentiation in their mind between what is north of 86 and what is south of 86 from a technical perspective. Further, the lands north of 86 have been studied in various ways since the, I believe it's the late 1980s, early 1990s, as part of a special policy area. That special policy area does not extend south of 86, and so there's both technical barriers from their perspective as well as policy barriers. And so the sort of the message I was left with was that they consider those lands not to have development potential, and they would be supportive of them remaining in the agricultural area.
I was speaking of the southwest portion.
Right.
Yeah.
That is
okay.
the portion.
Yeah, so if a large company came to me and wanted to put a commercial land up there, I would be able to say it's possible, not no. So then that would be between those guys after that, if we agreed to allow it to go. So what you're telling me, I believe, is that's not a definite no, that would be a they prefer you didn't.
The recommendation is that we do not designate it as part of the settlement area as part of this process. So it's designated in the agricultural area today, it's designated as flood. And that is how they are recommending that it remain.
Yeah, and again, 2 years down the road, if somebody came, they could deal with that then. We're not putting a dead no on it forever, it's just, we're not interested in it now.
They would have to do the work, yes, and do all of the technical studies to make that case. You know, whether or not that's realistically feasible, I wouldn't want to speculate on, but based on the feedback from Maitland Valley, they're suggesting that they do not believe that it's technically feasible.
Yeah, but nobody ever thought there'd be a McDonald's on the corner either, but thank you very much, and we'll just let that one go for now.
I don't know how you can fill two sides of a corner, four corners. not the other two.
Sure. Yep. So it's mentioned previously, a lot of the key considerations in terms of the mapping changes for Wingham is just ensuring that we're integrating the updated flood mapping. So council will note there is currently a dashed white and black line currently on the map that outlines the area that's part of the floodplain. What we're hoping to do with the new designation, with the new mapping, is have it as an overlay on each property that is affected by the floodplain, just so that we can be a little bit more clear with members of the public and transparent about which properties do have floodplain. You know, this is your warning that you need to speak with Maitland Valley versus which properties are not. We do find that the existing mapping with the single line is a bit difficult for members of the public to interpret. So that's the intent of having the overlay on each property is that there's minimal confusion for members of the public. In terms of other changes for Wingham, at this point we're not recommending a lot of changes, a few corrections in terms of as I mentioned before, some of the designations are not lined up correctly with parcels, so that's some of the changes we would be looking at. Recognizing, the new ideal supply business, it is zoned commercial and the designation is residential, making some of those key changes just to recognize new development. And then just along the Maitland River here, just correcting some of the mapping for areas when you have natural environment versus, a recreational park, making sure that that's recognized as parks and open space. So those are the major changes that we would propose for Wingham at this time.
So the industrial lands was an item that was raised during our discussion at the Section 26 meeting. And so I did revisit the North Huron and Morris Turnberry industrial land strategy that was done between 2013, I believe it was initiated, and then concluded in around the end of 2015. I was part of this process for a short period of time. And so took some time to sort of refamiliarize myself with that study and to take a really close look at what's changed in the years since that work was done. What we all certainly know is there's been a significant expansion on the Morris Turnberry side in terms of the Brightspan facility. On the North Huron side, there has been less change, but there has been the Huron Telecommunications building, for example, was built on that one corner property. There hasn't been a lot of change in terms of the parcels that are identified as vacant so that's with the purple hatching. And so what this leads is that there are still an abundance of land designated for industrial purposes at the north end of Wingham, both within Morris Turnberry and within North Huron. So I don't know that designating more industrial land is actually the solution that council is looking for, but rather it's engaging the current owners in discussion about, do they have plans for their property? If they don't, would they consider selling those properties to somebody who does want to build maybe a contractor's shop or something? Does council want to take some initiative and think about a municipally owned industrial park at the north end on lands which would be considered underutilized? So there may be some avenues for council to advance industrial development in Wingham, but I do not believe it would involve designating more lands industrial.
So Denise, if I could just ask, if we tried to do something with the privately owned land up there and it came to no avail, would it be in our best interest to de-designate that land, or I'm not sure that's the proper way to go, but again, are we going to spend 10 or 15 years trying to make something work if we could just put it somewhere else? And it's just, we're not going to get involved in that conversation. Like, I don't want to make any changes on your map or anything. I'm just asking you a question while you're in front of me.
I think it's about making an efficient use of the infrastructure that this community has invested in. And I think it's about identifying where the municipality might, again, as you have in many other cases with the trailer park property with Hutton Heights, showing that municipal leadership. And I'll use Goddard as an example. They have the Parsons Court development, which is a municipally owned industrial park. And so that's a case where the municipality went in, made the initial infrastructure investments in roads and servicing, stormwater facilities, and made that land investment ready for industrial development. That would be, as I say, one avenue for council to consider that I think would make better use of infrastructure that's already, it's already there, it's already in the ground, than trying to pick up and start somewhere else. I just, economically.
I absolutely agree with you.
Okay.
Yes, Reeve, so I just want to make comment too. I completely agree with Denise and the planner's assessment. I mean, it becomes a discussion about, it becomes a discussion with supply and demand. So, I mean, if you hold land at this particular point in your life, good for you, because supply and demand dictates what the price is, and obviously we know where land prices and real estate prices are at this moment. So, I mean, arguably, the Reeves comment about delisting and doing stuff, I mean, depends, because, I mean, ultimately, if you look at that area, we have residential that abuts right close to it as well, and there's that concern about the buffer zone between residential and industry, because, I mean, if the people, there's lots of things that have to happen to ensure that a person's residential house is not impacted significantly by industry. So, I think ultimately, more conversations municipally with, and county with these landowners to see what their true intention is, and if their true intention is just to hold the land, because then they don't want any neighbors, well then, let's be honest about it and tell us what that is. But if they're really truly just waiting for the right price, I'm not sure they're gonna get any better price today than today. So, I mean, is it municipally worth it? It depends, and I think that's a conversation that staff and council need to have as to whether there's an offer on the table or not. These conversations, when we're talking about designation, could spur the conversation even more privately in order to at least start some conversation with the municipally owned stuff in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else?
If I could add just one final thought, would be that, economic development staff at the county or locally economic development staff, could help to facilitate some conversation, because it can be difficult when you're doing industrial development. When you think about the design of an industrial park, well, is it 2-acre properties that the industries are seeking? Is it, in fact, no, they need more like 4-acre properties? Or is it contractor's yard that could really do okay with 1 acre? With residential development, it's much easier to predict the lot size that will meet the market. With industry, you need to maintain more flexibility, because it's more difficult to predict who might come forward. And so what also could happen with economic development staff is to organize a bit of a community conversation with folks who are in industry, who may be looking for an opportunity to invest. If we think of that young entrepreneur, maybe they're living on a property right now, they're building their own contractor's business, and they're really getting to that point where they can't operate it as a home industry, they need a physical industrial site. Those would be the types of people you'd want to hear from, and you'd want to have a sense of, okay, what is the interest? And then that would inform whether it's appropriate or in the public interest to move forward with a municipally owned industrial park. So those are some next steps that council could take to further this conversation, and it slightly outside of the 5-year review process.
And Reeve, I just wanted one more thing to add, is that, the industrial strategy conversation that happened with Morris Termery at the time was the intention of getting municipally owned water and sewer to those places, so that you're not waiting for those infrastructures on the border, because if those properties happen to be broken up into smaller pieces, then you would have connections available at that particular point. So, I don't think the Wingham ward has that concern from not having facility or infrastructure right there for the ability to connect. really it's the conversation is how do we connect the person to the buyer to get that industrial used in a more effective way than it is being effectively used today.
Thank you.
So just moving along, that's about concludes, you know, the key mapping areas that we wanted to discuss. Just in terms of, you know, next steps. So, you know, at this meeting today, the intent was to also present the first draft of the text amendment, which we can also certainly discuss this morning, and also discuss the mapping, and then also to seek direction from council to schedule these public open houses. Again, that is proposed in April. During that time, as Denise mentioned, we're also hoping to consult with various key landowners. So as part of the process, we are proposing that we would also provide individual letters to key landowners. We were initially looking at the area in Blythe. So either key landowners within the settlement area or adjacent to, just so that we can invite them to come speak with us and just have some dialogue. So that would be something we would also be seeking council's direction on. Based on that, you know, that'll be kind of our phase of, you know, getting a lot of the initial public consultation and feedback. The intent with that would be that we would incorporate that feedback that we receive, and then we would come back with a second draft amendment probably in June or July. So that is kind of where we're at in terms of the steps. And then as mentioned before, you know, as we mentioned when we initially started this, the goal, again, for considering the adoption of the amendment would be for August and for county approval going into the fall. Again, keeping in mind, we'll certainly have to be flexible with these timelines, just depending on how community consultation goes and discussions of the draft amendment.
So for the policy end, we did provide council with the full policy document, and you'll see that where there's a strike through, that's a proposed deletion, and then there was an addition, it will be in bold and italics. So I don't intend to go through it line by line. I think council, you know, has had a chance to look through the document. Many of the changes, particularly in the urban section, are items that we discussed when Monica and I had the housing friendly workshop with council last year. And so that was at that time we received direction from this council about the types of changes that you wanted to see implemented strictly from, or specifically from a housing perspective. Now, those changes do impact the agricultural areas in that we are proposing to allow a second permanent dwelling on commercial scale farms, as well as on smaller agricultural holdings. We'd also allow for an additional residential unit, but it would have to be located much closer to the main dwelling, and it's actually half the distance, so 60 meters if you're on a AG1 property and 30 meters if you're on an AG4 property. Furthermore, we see the urban areas, we see the policies have been shifted to really promote intensification, infill opportunities, wanting to allow for that mix of residential uses within our existing neighborhoods in a way that's done with you know, consideration of design, so that we can build trust within the community that density can be done really well. And it doesn't have to be something that, you know, when we think of density, we think, oh, well, that's not for rural small towns, you know, it can be done very gently. And density can be anything from a semi-detached, a fourplex, getting up into rows of townhouses, or it could be apartment buildings. And so when we think about, there's that broad range of housing types. And by having that broad range, we can meet the range of needs in our community, whether those are physical needs, and we think about aging in place, whether they're social needs, folks who potentially need more support. And we also want to think about from a financial standpoint. We need to have a range of unit types and sizes to meet different people's you know, financial situations. So that's what the policies really are looking at in terms of major amendments. The policy document is something I think that, you know, rather than go through line by line, if there's any questions from council at this time, or as you say, if you have more time to look at it, feel free, you can always email Hannah and I a question as well.
Thank you very much. Council? Question, go ahead,
I got dozens of questions.
go ahead.
Do you want to turn a light on?
Yeah, it's hard to see,
David?
but
Kelly, you grab that.
Sure.
your the intensification and the policies for affordable housing and all those, you have targets. I have deep trouble when you have a target. If you say a suggested target, or we have moving targets, something, because you can't tell us that, say in Wangham, we have to have 30%.
I believe that's the
You know,
existing.
for a new, policy for affordable housing, that's just one example, okay? A target of 30% for all new residential development. Excuse me? You can't do that. You can suggest it, yes, but it's all depending on the developer. It's his money, his or her money. They have to make money, and so what works for them. But it's the intensification too. There's targets involved there. I don't have them written down right here. You can't, I can't accept that. Suggested, yes, but not, that's the target. You're dead if you don't do it.
So Chris, I'm not sure how long your list is. I'm just wondering if you wanted, I'm sure that what they're going by are guidelines that have been presented to them, and I'll let the girls speak to that. If it's a long list, did you want to just maybe take some time later and have a chat, and then the girls could bring up, or would you, how would you want to handle this? Because I don't know what your schedule's like.
We certainly have time, if,
What are other counselors
I
like? Do
guess-
they have lists as well?
I
or
guess
not?
maybe what I would say is any like wording specific ones where it's like concerned with a word, maybe run those by after. If it's concerns with the overall policy, the intent of the policy, more that high level policy making, I would say those are the ones that that probably Denise and Hannah are looking for direction on right now, is to get an overall sense from a policy perspective of where council wants to go.
So Chris, I'll hand the floor back over to you if you have questions now.
Go somewhere else, Reeve,
Okay.
so I can go over this.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
I'd just like to bring something up to you, Reeve. We passed there a while ago about the garden suites, and I still have question with it. We gave them a 20-year time limit. I'm just wondering, are other places doing that too? Like, and then a 3-year renewal? Well, 20 years is a generation, or 5 different councils. I'm just wondering, when we do the official plan every 5 years, are we not going a bit too far out on the limb by it? Because these are movable houses supposedly. Would it be better to shorten that down? It's just my thought on that. Like 20 years seems like a long time when, just for decision making, like a lot of things can get forgot about down the road. That's just my thought there. And one other thing with that, through Reeve, the taxes that's collected on that, you can have a garden suite, so you got a regular house and an acre of land. So does that garden suite go the same way? An acre of land for a garden suite? Does that double, in a sense, the taxes from the buildings factor there?
so a couple of different questions there. I think firstly, it's the potentially, so the garden suite policies is something that's been in the Planning Act for a very long time, and it stipulates the 20-year time period. So that's not proposing to change. What I think is what's more significant in this shift that the provincial government put through Bill 139 is about additional residential units being permitted permanently on properties in the agricultural setting. So we would no longer, in many cases, we would no longer need garden suite provisions, because let's say, for example, someone has AG4 property and they have 4 acres. They have an existing residence and they wish to build, let's say they want to build a detached garage with a unit above. They could build that as of right in the zoning bylaw with no garden suite agreement required, no requirement to remove the unit, no requirement for it to be mobile. The only requirement would be that that additional residential unit has to use the same laneway as the main house, and it has to use one of the well, the existing well, or the existing septic system. Now, 9 times out of 10, it's easier to use the same well than the same septic system, because just the way the runs are, sometimes you can't add on to them. And that's also because we want to promote protection of the aquifer. And less wells is ultimately better. So in fact, Councillor Heffer, I believe we will get away from people applying for garden suites at all.
Okay, appreciate it. And when they do that extra build, it won't infringe on the gentleman across the road, like any building that he has to, that he may want to do in the future? Could it deter some of his expansion? I guess that's my question.
So from an MDS perspective, we would have to apply MDS to that new double, let's say it was a 2-car garage with a unit above. Because it's a residence, we would have to apply, but we're going to require that residence to be clustered with the existing house within 30 meters. It also has to be to the rear of the residence. So chances are, it's going to have a very minimal impact on a barn trying to locate in proximity.
Okay, thank you, I missed that part.
Oh, that's so good. And from a tax perspective, I'm not a tax expert by any means, but from an MPAC perspective, when you obtain a building permit, there's a notice to MPAC, and people might have received a little notice they put on your door after you've had a building permit, said, we've been by to assess your property, and they come out and they look physically at what's been built, and then they raise your assessment.
Thank you.
And so that's how you would get more taxes.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, my list is shorter now. However, should I send my list to you or wait for an open house?
Either way.
Either way? Okay. Greenhouses. Mention greenhouses. Now, we have a bylaw about distance for marijuana. I didn't see it in there. Should it be?
We could add a reference to cannabis. Sure.
And so is what you're referring to, so like we did
So
the
grow.
housekeeping amendment to our zoning bylaw. So we did a zoning bylaw housekeeping amendment recently, which put sensitive use cannabis setback distances.
Yeah.
So I guess, are you just making sure the two align, I guess, is what you're looking for?
I want to see it in there.
Okay.
That's all. I was really, I'll give you a huge thumb up. I was glad to see that the 30% forest cover was taken out. That was good, because that was always something that bothered the heck out of me. Endangered species, I don't know what they are. And I don't know if any of us know what they are. I think it should be, a list should be available for landowners. Because the last thing I want is someone coming on my property saying, huh, I know about some salamander. There's a salamander. Well, I didn't know that. I want to know these things, so I'd like to see a list. Accessibility, I know we have to follow AODA, but then it mentioned Universal Design and Accessibility Guidelines. What is that?
So those are guidelines which we have developed that we utilize during the site plan process. And it provides more specific guidance on, the width of not just the parking space, but the accessibility aisle next to the parking space. So if, for example, someone was, let's say they had a truck, and in the back of the truck, that's where the wheelchair, the mobility device was stored, and then they need room for an arm to come out, you need to leave that space. So when Hannah and I review site plans, whether it's for the new gas stations, new commercial developments primarily, but also for residential, we use that accessibility universal guide to help do a checklist and make sure that the site plan meets accessibility criteria.
Okay, the parking spaces today for accessibility are quite wide, so that would be, it's already there, right? That already is met.
So not in all cases. Historically, accessibility spaces had to be a certain width, but they didn't have to have the aisle next to them, such that if somebody was to park right next to them, the person using that mobility device doesn't have enough room to navigate between the vehicles.
Okay.
So that's a new standard.
Okay. This is about intensification and say, well, say an apartment building right now, a 3-story, was going to go up potentially, and somewhere in Wingham, we'll say. It used to say, or any building, maybe a fourplex or a townhouse, doesn't matter. It used to say it had to be in character of the surrounding houses. Now you stroke the character and put in is context. That word didn't make sense as it was used. So how do you mean it?
So the context of the neighborhood in terms of the height of buildings on abutting properties, for example, as opposed to character. Character, in my opinion, and it's also referenced in this document, which is the Housing Affordability Task Force report, the word character has been, I think, misused and misunderstood in that in many neighborhoods, it can be difficult to define, well, what is the true character of this neighborhood? It can be very subjective and mean different things to different people, which is such that it can lead to a lot of angst when there is change proposed in the neighborhood. So our proposal in terms of intensification is that we want to allow for intensification as of right in the official plan and in the zoning bylaw. But when it comes to site plan approval, which applies to any building with more than 4 units, we will be utilizing this guideline, the Residential Intensification Guideline, which was developed specifically by Huron County for application in Huron County, and it's a framework for design. So this document, what it does is it comprehensively addresses commonly heard concerns about intensification projects, whether it's parking, lighting, landscaping, the height of a building, the level of windows on a building. And so this is the way in which we will ensure that good design is still being done, but it won't be evaluated at the zoning stage, it will be evaluated at the site plan stage.
Yeah, but then public input isn't allowed at that stage.
Correct.
So when would it be? I'd see, when you said intensification has the right, you got to be careful there. If you've got an empty lot and it's surrounded by houses somewhere, and somebody wants to put a big guy up, and he's got the right to do it, I don't know. I
If I can
can't.
just intervene here, I do believe this is a Huron County policy. So it's and I think we passed it 2 or 3 years ago as far as what you're talking about here. I don't think I'm just asking kind of to see what's going on here. I don't think we have control over that, do we? Like,
You do have control over how it's implemented in the local area, but what I would encourage council to think about is that, from many perspectives, from, making good use of the infrastructure investment you've already made, intensification allows you to make use of those existing pipes in the ground. It leads to development which is more walkable, which is better for people's health, gets them out moving, right? That takes away, costs in the medical system, for example. We also have to think about the fact from a climate change perspective, walkable, more dense communities are able to better meet the demands of a changing climate. So I think we also want to think about protecting farmland. If we don't grow up, we're going to have to grow out. And what is the cost from a farmland and food production perspective if we have acres of land being changed over to residential? So there's many reasons why intensification is strongly promoted through the provincial policy statement, through the Huron County official plan, and why we as planners believe that direction needs to be in the North Huron official plan.
Yeah.
So this is an item that I would say that Reeve Bailey is correct. The planning department has taken a very strong stance, but we've also developed, as I say, different tools to help bring accountability to the process, to address, I believe what Councillor Palmer is getting at, is that members of the public care about their communities, they care about their neighborhoods, and they want to see change done well. We concur with that, and we've developed tools that will allow us to bring that about.
Yeah, the rights of the surrounding area, those individuals, they can't be just thrown out. I don't think we're in that business of not listening to our taxpayers. We have to be careful there. I'm all for infilling and intensifying, to a point, but it has to suit, has to fit, has to. It can't be just a big white elephant that's filled up with people amongst a normal town situation, residential situation. That's my big concern is rights, the right of infilling. We have to be careful. I'd rather see it that this is our intention, this is what we want, but we do have to listen to our taxpayers. We're in trouble if we don't.
But the taxpayers, through this whole thing, they will be able to step forward and talk. There's times for everybody to discuss what's going on in their backyards.
Not if it ends up in a site plan, though.
Yeah, there's been a change there, a bit of a change there, but again, it's all done by county and provincial and federal and blah, 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 blah.
But hold on, Reeve. The conversation is that the public's comments are still available if there's a zoning bylaw amendment. Like if the zoning bylaw says that they can build 5 stories, then they can build 5 stories. But if intensification means that they want to build 5 stories and the zoning bylaw says that you can only build 2, well, then they can only build 2 unless they come to council and get public input to get it changed. So I mean, we need to make sure not only the official plan is correct, but we also need to make sure our zoning bylaw is exactly what we want permitted on those pieces of property that are being changed or not changed. Because this is the time. And I mean, if that's the chance where that consultation, if we were wanting after the official plan amendment is looked at, and we're looking at the zoning bylaw amendment, and there's potentially these pieces of property for intensification that we're looking at, our zoning bylaw currently says 3, and we think that it's okay to go to 5, well, you know what? Public consultation is going to dictate whether that is the idea. I mean, this is the time for public consultation about those changes, not only in the official plan, but in the zoning bylaw. The official plan is the overarching conversation. The zoning bylaw is the one that's going to get into the detail about what the permitted use of that piece of property is available to them. And developers will then have that option that if they want to amend or deviate from that proposed plan, they're going to have to go through the public consultation phase. And I mean, we've recognized that phase. Council right now is heard that phase more than anybody. That we've had that more than once on zoning bylaw amendments. So I don't think changing the official plan as it reads is going to change that process. That process is still going to be a factor. It's really where the zoning bylaw amendment or the zoning bylaw really ensures that the zoning bylaw appropriately reflects what the official plan policy is actually telling us to do.
Thank you. Okay.
For now, yeah, I'll send in my rest.
Yes, thank you very kindly. And that's okay with the county rules? Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Reeve, I mean, I want to ask a question because I'm not really clear, and this is more of a council question, more for Councillor Palmer and Councillor Heffer, and the question about the direction that was asked about whether we're going to send notices to the small changes, the not material changes, I guess. So I want to ask the question because there was a question about value from agricultural perspective, and I want to walk through this for my own process to understand the concern. So if I'm a farmer that has 125 acres of workable land, and today I want to sell that land, there's a value put to that, right? That land today is zoned agriculture. I have 125 acres of workable land, designated agriculture. Tomorrow, I have 125, if we were to not send this amendment to these property owners, and it goes through the process, I have 125 acres of workable land, designated 124 acres of it's designated agriculture, and 1% of it's designated natural environment. Can you tell me, are you telling me the value of that land has now changed just because of that? Is that what you're telling me?
Yes. You've lost an acre of arable. When you want to buy a farm, the question is, how much arable land do you have? But it has to be zoned that way because you're going to get dinged otherwise. So the person would have to say, after the mapping, I'm only 124. Or after the mapping, I'm 126. It can go either way. But if it's 124, he's technically, yes, you can still farm that other, or maybe not. It depends what the situation is. You've lost whatever the value. Today it could be $12,000 to $15,000. And that's just the way it is, sort of, as it is zoned. Yeah, you can still perhaps farm that acre, but the farmer doesn't have the right to get paid per acre on that acre. I don't see it that way.
So I guess my question is,
That's the danger of this mapping.
Gentlemen.
So Eve, I need clarity in the sense of, so when you're talking about value from a farm perspective, you're not talking about value from a workable farm perspective. Because the workable land didn't change in this context. What I'm saying to you is you had 125 workable acres before, and now you still have 125 workable acres, but 1 acre of it's designated something different. So you're telling me, what you're telling me is when I sell a piece of property, the value is not based on workable acres, it's based on the designation of what it is. That's what you're telling me. I mean, that's what I need a clarity from my perspective when we're wanting to send these amendments of non-material idea. Because if they're correct, and I'm not saying you're not, if that is correct, then you're absolutely right. We should send everything to them.
So just to follow up on that, and then I'm going to hand it over to you. So if I understand this right, Chris, if I was going to buy, and I don't own a farm, if I was going to buy a farm and it was 125 acres, you would offer me the farm at $19,000 an acre, except for the bush, I could get it at $10,000 an acre, and then you're losing money selling it. You don't sell it as a 125 acre farm, $19,000 an acre, take it or leave it. I don't know how farms are sold. Maybe Denise or Anita, you can help me with that. I think that's where everybody's going. I think that's where you're trying to go.
Yeah, if I was going to buy a farm today, I would be looking at arable acres. The bush part doesn't matter. Really, it doesn't matter. It's just the arable land right now. The bush part, yes, you would like it to be a good one because then you can harvest that. Every 10 years you can do a cut, but its value is a lot less than what the arable land is. Today, things have gone wacky.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Anita wanted to speak to it, then I'm going to hand it back to you.
Yeah, no, I was agreeing with Chris.
That's the way it is. Okay.
100 acres, and it's mostly by arable land.
Okay.
Workable land.
Okay.
And I would also agree with that. I think with what we're seeing more and more with technology and farming, and certainly with precision agriculture, is that most farmers have a better sense of the actual acreage that they crop because it's from the machinery. The combine will tell you what acreage by GPS was planted. So oftentimes I think when someone's looking to purchase a farm, they're not going by, an estimation on the WebGIS portal. They're going by the numbers from the combine that are GPSed, and not everyone has that certainly, but I think more and more we are seeing that precision agriculture approach. So I think what I would just give a slight variation to Deputy Seep's example would be that if someone has, if somebody has 100 acres, and at the back, let's say there's 5 acres of bush, and right now it looks like it's 5 acres, but in fact, we've designated part of the field and we've left off part of the bush. All we're doing is taking it and just moving it back over. At the end of the day, it'll still be largely 5 acres. It'll be what's there. It's just shifted a little bit. And that's what we mean about an immaterial change. If I saw a change that was literally 1 for 1, right? So I'm taking away an acre and I'm adding an acre, that in my opinion is an immaterial change. If, however, I was deducting 3 acres and only adding 1 acre, that's actually 2 acres that would be going to agriculture, right, in terms of the balance. We could certainly send a letter to let them know that. If it was going the other way, I agree, right? If we're deducting 1 acre and adding 3 acres on another side, we should let them know that. So I am perfectly happy to send out the letters. I just want them to be legible and understandable to the people who are receiving them. As we pointed out, there are some which are such small lines, you literally can't see the change on the map because it's that minor. Those are the ones which I would recommend to council don't warrant a letter, because I think it will create more confusion in that is such a fractional type of change.
So just to finish, and then I'll be done with this. So going over to what Trevor said. So if you're selling, no matter what you're doing with your mapping, if you own a farm and it's got 100 acres that's workable and 50 acres that's not workable, no matter what you do, you're still going to sell the farm as 100 acres workable and 50 acres not workable. You didn't change anything there.
That's right.
Yeah.
On that example,
Yeah.
can I speak?
Yeah.
On that example, but there's so many farms where the bush is going to grow because of, like, how many years ago was that? I thought it was 02, but you said it was earlier than that. Trees grow like crazy, and that bush is bigger now. See, in the old days, it was arable land. That's what you wanted. And you didn't even think of the bush. Well, you did, but it was simpler then. Today, and it's going to get worse as the years move on, I think, it's gotten more technical. So now all of a sudden that farm is agricultural land and natural environment. That natural environment word never existed a bunch of years ago. This is new terminology, and it's new thinking that a farmer has to be aware of. And that there's so much importance put on natural environment today. The human aspect is just going down the hill. Nobody cares about them anymore. It's the natural environment has precedence. And it's going to get worse as the climate change thing keeps going, the snowball goes down the hill. It's going to get more important. So we're just at this point now where it's a big notice to people now, and the change is starting. But it's going to get 5 years from now, the picture will be different. It'll be more important. So that's why I'm speaking out now, is because I'm trying to ring a bell saying we got to be careful here. Okay?
Yep.
So that's why I've got issues with this. I don't know what the future's. I know how the future's going to go with it, and it's going to get worse for humans, the farmer.
Okay, I'm going to go to Anita first, and then to Paul.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Chris.
Denise, will this new mapping also go to MPAC? Because if you change agricultural to forest, that will have an influx on the taxes, to the municipal taxes, because of the difference in designation. If you put like the one example you had, there was a 5 acre bush area right in now, so that's 5 acres less of agricultural land and 5 more forest, so that is a difference in taxation.
But it's already being taxed at the use of the land. So they're not looking at the zoning bylaw, they're looking at what is the land used for. So even if we have it designated for natural environment today, they're already being taxed based on agriculture because MPAC doesn't go off of our mapping.
But how are they checking out if it's forest or do they have their own
They have
mapping?
their own process.
They have their own process. So the forest that is there might already be taxed as a forest?
As a forest,
Okay.
yes. In all likelihood it is.
Yeah, thank you.
I just feel with sending out that letter, even if it's just that minor figure, I figure we're doing our due diligence, that no one in the future can come back to us and say, oh, you didn't tell us that, because that just takes up people's time. That's why I feel a letter should go out to everyone, whether it is just maybe a half an acre. I know we just have to do it one time, and then it's recorded, and that's just my thought.
Okay. Thank you very much. Does staff have direction then?
Well,
I don't think so.
So there is the draft motion before council, which pending council passing that motion would provide direction to the planning staff.
Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
Is the consultation, is that the end of the
Well, I'm not sure.
consultation, or?
Yes.
I thought she said it was.
Okay, I have one question then.
Yes.
It pertains to the extraction designation. And I know you do a lot of work with Maitland Valley and all the other organizations. I'm surprised that with the extraction that we have buffer zones from flood zones for farms and for towns and buildings. But there's no, I don't, in quite a few of the mappings, there's no buffer from a water course. And as we know, at least I know as being a avid fisherman, that, you know, you show me a trout creek and I'll show you a gravel pit. I mean, they're in that, because it's a gravel base for the species. But there's been more and more gravel pits put up along the Maitland River and right up to it. It's, you know, as soon as you open up land out, there's going to be runoff, because you're taking the soil and absorption. So they're still going to, it's going to get into the water course. But I've never seen any buffer zones along aggregate extraction and natural, your species. You have to do it as a farm, you got to worry about the salamander. Well, you know, how does that work when they get away with that?
So all of the aspects of an aggregate pit development are regulated and addressed through the ARA, the Aggregate Resource Act, the licensing process. So we have pre-designated areas for extraction in the official plan based on where the deposits are, and that comes from the ARIP papers. We don't, however, zone those properties for extraction until someone applies through an ARA license. As part of a complete application for both their ARA license as well as their zoning bylaw amendment, they are required to provide a series of technical studies, archaeological, environmental impact studies, hydrogeological studies that would build in that buffer. Species at risk would have to be looked at. So there's all sorts of aspects, and then that goes into the approval that they would eventually receive from both the township in terms of their zoning bylaw amendment, and then the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry in the terms of their license. So it's all done within the pit. What you might notice across the landscape is that there are historic gravel pits. They were not developed at a time where we looked at all those things. So they are grandfathered, and in some cases won't have much of a buffer. New pits will. And that's just a product of time. I did want to go back to the endangered species. I didn't have an opportunity to address Councillor Palmer's request for a list. That information is considered to be sensitive in that first of all, we don't have mapping that says where endangered species are. We could say, what are some of the endangered species that we are aware of that are in this general region of Ontario? That would be considered public. But no other information about endangered species is able to enter into the public forum for the express purpose of protecting those species.
Good thought.
Okay.
Anyone else? I believe Carson may have a motion for us.
So the draft motion would be that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby directs staff to 1, provide notices to landowners with proposed mapping changes. 2, send letters to landowners with urban or adjacent lands of interest for further consultation during open houses to inform land analysis. And 3, schedule open house dates for the week of April 18th, 2022.
I haven't looked at my calendar, but do I have a mover? Rick moves. Seconder, please. Not seeing us, I have Trevor seconding, or,
Yeah, for discussion, but he was the mover, so it's fine.
so did you want to?
I have a question.
Yes.
So based on that motion, is that taking into consideration the recommendation of adding one, taking away one? Are we sending one, or are we not? Let's be clear, because I don't know what is that motion telling me? So is the motion telling me if there's a change, we're sending? Is that what the motion's telling me?
To me, it is because one says provide notice to landowners with proposed mapping changes. So anytime there's a mapping change, there would be a notice sent.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure I'm clear and understand, make sure that the planning staff is, because we've had lots of discussion about that, so.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Kevin.
Did we accomplish some of the things that we were wanting to add to that plan? Like some of the future steps that we want to do? We haven't changed any land designation. Weren't we trying to accomplish that in some areas?
Well, I believe we're going to look at the north end of Blythe, right? And there was some down by the another place in Blythe, the campgrounds. There was some and in North Huron here, I don't believe there were, or sorry, North Huron, in the Wingamort, I don't believe there was any. And my understanding is in East Wawanosh, we're going to wait a couple of years. We're not going to talk about, so maybe just tell us what we are.
You talked about the Hutton Heights and the properties that are adjacent to it.
Yeah. In the conversation, and I'll let Denise talk to it. Yeah.
So the second motion is in regards to sending letters to specific landowners with urban or adjacent lands of interest for further consultation.
Okay.
So if you would like to direct staff to send a letter specifically to the landowner south of Hutton Heights, you can certainly do that. I want to be clear that I don't want to give that landowner, any kind of expectation that their land will necessarily be changed or not. So I think the wording of that letter would be very carefully done. At this time, the way the motion reads, it's the letters are being sent to the landowners that staff have identified as being considered for change.
I believe in the conversation we talked about waiting 2 years, getting Hutton Heights up and going and starting to build, if I recall. And then we would approach him, because my concern was we couldn't. So we're going to, that was my understanding of the conversation. So no, I would guess we're not sending anything to, and Dwayne, help me here. We're not sending anything to anyone around Hutton Heights at this particular time. Just Blythe, two places in Blythe, I believe. 4? Well, I wasn't paying attention.
That's okay.
As long as,
And I believe we will also have more individuals come forward, as Councillor Heffer indicated, that there are individuals who would seek us out to have conversations that we may not have identified, but that's the whole purpose of the public process, is that we encourage, and certainly as councillors, I hope you will encourage, as you're speaking with ratepayers, go and have a conversation. If you're just curious, even, what are the options for your property? You're thinking maybe about succession planning, or you're thinking that you are on the edge of a development and you're sort of wondering if your property is next. By all means, come and have those exploratory conversations with us. That's what we're here for.
Thank you. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Reeve. I realize that today was probably mostly about mapping and stuff, but I'm envisioning that this is so important, and I'm envisioning, page by page, we should go through it. I know there's only 100 pages, but just to say, I had some questions, Paul had some, I haven't heard too many questions, but we need more questions. This is, if we don't question the document at some point, it's just a rubber stamp, and we can't do that. This is too important. Our future is on this document for everything we want to do. We need to go through the fine-tooth comb. This is just my feeling about it. And just to say, well, we read it at home, and, okay, you know, for or against type of thing. And I think we owe the public that we scrutinized this thing.
Yeah, I've been on this for 3 hours now, so we didn't just rubber stamp anything. I've probably got 30 hours in the last 2 months on this, behind the scenes. Again, a lot of the questions can be answered if you read the document, and have your questions prepared as you did, Chris. And talk to the people behind, and this is not something these young ladies just dreamed up overnight. This is an extension, continuation, or change of our official plan we've always had. It's not something we just started now. And these are very qualified people that base it on the law of the land, whether it's provincial, federal, or our county or ourselves. They are going by the letter of the law, and they have thoroughly, with our staff, worked it over and over and over. It's not something that just popped up out of the blue. So very clearly, we have gone over it, and we will be having more consultation. And again, you're going to speak to them later about the other questions you had, okay? So that you gave your view, and I've given my view on that. Go ahead, Anita.
Yes, thank you, Reeve Bailey. And it is a plan. We have all kinds of bylaws in place and minimum distance regulations to work within the plan. I think we can. If you want to build in a certain zone, you can apply for that, and county will work with you and see if that's possible or not. We've done that multiple times.
Thank you.
So,
go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, through you, Reeve. This process and our responsibilities as counselors, this is for our education. This same plan is going out to the public for their education. And the right of every home or every landowner or every constituent has the ability to make the comments as it pertains to them. I understand Councillor Palmer's stake in the game. He knows it better than I. I'm not saying I know anything about agriculture and the processes and the effects. But us as councillors, we're not the ultimate say. We do the business of the municipality, but when these kind of things come up, as they pointed out, the public has consultation. They get to put their input, their information input into the process, which may make changes. It's really not a council's position to assume the public's anticipation or effect. As far as the council goes, there's ample opportunity for all the changes. If each landowner sees fit that they're being harmed in any way, it's their right and duty and responsibility to come forward to the public and tell them that this is where it's going. For us to debate the rights and wrongs of these mandates. These are just the mandates that are being presented to us for our information and also our input. I don't think that's, back to reiterate, that's council's responsibility to take the input of all municipality landowners to inject any of that into the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Trevor.
I just want to, any report that comes to council should get council's same understanding, same importance to every report that comes to us. I don't disagree as Councillor Palmer as we need to take, it's only done every 5 years. Like, we don't want to make this change and then 2 minutes down the road, we go, oh, by the way, we should have thought about that. So I respect Councillor Palmer's push to make sure that council figure out what their initiatives are and make sure that it is projected in what this document tells us. If we don't do that today, or during this process before it's approved, we are not providing the public with the proper information and due diligence in order to do that. What I will say, though, is, as the REIV has indicated, I am taking a lot of information from the planners as they are the expert. I am not. I mean, does this plan truly affect a lot of the rural or the urban center? No, it doesn't, not a lot. So it's the settlement area is the settlement area. Very rarely are you going to change something in the settlement area, like it's already settled. So, I mean, we're talking, a lot of the land use stuff we talked about was in the agricultural sector. I mean, I'm not an expert. I expect, the people who have agricultural background, and that's one of the reasons why I made my questions today when Councillor Heffer and Councillor Palmer, because now I've got a better understanding of how land is looked upon, because my thought was completely different. So, do I think there is a more value-added place to do the questions and comments? Do I think we have to have a 10-hour marathon session at this table analyzing every question or every statement that's being made? No. And the reason why I say that is because we're not doing it the opposite way. We're not doing the zoning bylaws and then deciding we're doing the official plan amendment. The official plan amendment, or the official plan, is the overarching discussion, and then if we want to have the dive-in deep discussion about the zoning bylaw that says what are the acceptable uses on those properties to ensure they are fitting with the means of the official plan, that to me is more valuable than the overarching document that is really helping with, came from a lot of provincial policy statements, come from a lot of Planning Act conversations. The nuts and bolts of this discussion is going to be in the zoning bylaw amendment, in my opinion. I could be completely wrong, but I think there's going to be more value to the public as it relates to the zoning bylaw and how it potentially could be amended than what the official plan amendment really looks at from a day-to-day perspective and how people are going to use their land. So ultimately, Councillor Palmer, I completely respect your position on we need to make sure this is right. I don't think there's anybody sitting here in this meeting today, and why it's a special meeting, to say that you're not wrong. How we do that in the most effective resources of time is we as councillors. I have no problem with people sending, if you have questions or your comments to the planner, feel free to copy the rest of council, so council knows where everybody else's thoughts is. Now, should we get into a conversation where you do mass reply alls? No, because then that means it's a meeting. What we need to do is then you at least have the understanding, because if we leave here today and I think of something and I ask Denise, well, do I think the rest of council should know that? My thought? Yes. Yep. But I mean, that's where I think we're going to get more value than trying to do a marathon session and think, because I guarantee you we could be here 17 hours and I walk out of here in 2 hours and I'll think of something else. So I think of me, it's more valuable to get the information. We've read this, we've now had it for 2 weeks. We're gonna have it, there's not an open house till April, we're gonna have it another month. There's lots of time there for us to digest this thing and get our information or questions off to the planning to fully encompass what we want this decision to be. So I respect completely what you're saying, Councillor Palmer. I thank you for your passion about it.
Thank you very kindly. Anyone else? Nita, go ahead.
Well, yeah, sorry, this was just a short question. We didn't talk about Auburn and Belgrave. Is there any expansion there or any different designation there? The little areas in Auburn and Belgrave that are in North Huron?
At this time, no, there was nothing identified in terms of expansions or changes to designations in either of those.
Okay, thank you.
Through you, Reeve. Just so we can say to our constituents that if they have any questions about it when they get their letters, they have open dialogue with you. That's okay. Thank you.
Is everybody good? Carson, can you read that by,
Sorry,
motion?
Reeve, just-
Yes, go
just a-
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So thank you for everybody's comments on it. I guess is to you, Denise and Hannah, do you have a willingness, if there's a comment sent in or by us or by the public at these consultations, like at what point or how do you deal with that? Do you say, that's a really good point, maybe you should change this up, or, it is what it is? Like, do you have a really good willingness to listen? Because that's important it's important to all of us. We need to have confidence that you will listen. There's lots of examples out there in society where the same thing comes up and they're not listening. I'm not talking about you folks. They're not listening at all. They've already got it figured out. It's just, we'll appease the public. But I trust you that you will be listening.
We are registered professional planners in the province of Ontario, and it is our ethics that we must value all of public consultation and fully consider how the comments made could influence the direction and meet the public interest. So we are mandated to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Rick.
Yes, through you, Reeve. My feeling, I'd put my trust into the expertise of the planning group and looking forward to the feedback
Anyone else?
from the public.
Thank you very much, Rick. If you just wouldn't mind repeating the motion on the floor and who first and seconded it, please.
So again, the motion on the floor is that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby directs staff to 1, provide notice to landowners with proposed mapping changes, 2, send to landowners with urban or adjacent lands of interest for further consultation. Send letters to landowners with urban or adjacent lands of interest for further consultation during open houses to inform land analysis, and 3, schedule open house dates for the week of April 18th, 2022. Your mover is Councillor McBurney and your seconder is Deputy Reeve Sipe.
We're good, gentlemen? Okay, thank you. I call the vote. All in favor? Carries. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies. It was an interesting morning. Okay. Closed session and reporting out, we have none. Confirmatory, confirmatory bylaw, that a bylaw number 41-2022 being a bylaw to adopt, confirm, ratify matters dealt with by the Council of the Township of North Huron at the March 24th, 2022 meeting, be introduced, read a first, second, third, and final time, and signed by the Reeve and clerk and engrossed in the bylaw books. Do I have a mover? I have Kevin moving. Seconder, please. Anita seconds. All in favor? Carries. Thank you very much. Adjournment. The Council of Township of North Huron agreeing there be no further business before the council. The meeting hereby adjourns at
12:15 p.m.
12:15 p.m. Do I have a mover? I have Kevin moving. Seconder, please. All seconds. All in favor? Carries. Thank you. Everybody have a good day.